to divert freight to the West Coast to kind of avoid any labor disputes or labor issues that might arise, which would gum up supply chains on those ports.
Yep, we've seen that before. All right, Lee Klaskow, great stuff as always. Lee Klaskow, Senior Transportation Logistics Analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence. He was over in Asia last week meeting with shippers and investors on, so is it a global story that he follows there. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C., World and National News with Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Paul and Alex. The International Court of Justice is demanding Israel take steps to prevent acts considered genocide. It stopped short of ordering an immediate halt of military operations in Gaza. ICJ President Joan Donoghue.
The State of Israel shall take immediate and effective measures to ensure the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
This was a preliminary ruling from a panel of judges in The Hague in a case brought by South Africa accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. GOP frontrunner former President Trump is calling for Senate Republicans to not make a deal with Democrats on border security to deny President Biden a legislative victory ahead of the elections. That left one of the top Republican negotiators, Senator James Lankford, dismayed.
There are some that are saying, hey, to protect President Trump, we need to make sure we don't vote on this. I don't agree on that.
No plan has been finalized so far. No legislative text has been released, but negotiators had hoped to wrap up this agreement within just a few days. They've been working on this since before the holidays. A new organization called the Howie Liebengood Foundation is named for a Capitol Police officer who defended the building during the attack on January 6th. He died by suicide 3 days later. Attorney General Merrick Garland attended the unveiling of the new organization.
We know that law enforcement officers endured horrific physical violence on that day. They were punched, tackled, and tased as they defended the Capitol and those inside.
Attorney General Garland says the Justice Department has now expanded its coverage under the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program to include mental health support. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Right now on the screen, it's a mix of green and red. After another record close yesterday, S&P 500 kind of teetering between gains and losses. Investors weighing disappointing results from Intel against signs of cooling inflation. Intel right now the worst performing stock of the S&P 500 after they gave a weak forecast for first quarter sales. That, of course, weighing on other chip makers. Meantime, Cameron Dawson at New Edge Wealth says, tech has led markets for a pretty good reason.
So what you have is this really divergent market as well under the surface, where the only sectors that have had positive earnings revisions in the last 6 months are tech and comm services. So those are the sectors that, of course, have led the market.
Price figures show the Federal Reserve's preferred gauge of underlying inflation rose at the slowest annual pace in roughly about 3 years. So this bolsters hopes that officials are going to cut rates maybe sooner than expected. At the same time, a separate report shows a larger than expected jump in personal spending. S&P 500, 6 points higher right now. That's up 0.1%, 4,900 on the index. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 108 points. That's up 0.3%. The NASDAQ 100, 38 points lower. That's down 0.2%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube as well, so head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Radio. Alex, we're talking about the good economic data. It seems like a soft landing is certainly in the cards here. And I look at the WIRP function, the World Interest Rate Probability Function, WIRP, go on the terminal, and it's got like a 45% probability of a rate cut in March. I don't really care, I don't think. I don't care when it happens, because I know it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I don't really need the when. But I don't. People still talking about that. I don't know. It just feels like, boy, if rates are going to be cut, I'm in good shape.
Well, yeah, but it's not the when now. It's the how much and how long.
Yep,
and then
absolutely.
That really matters to like the belly and the.
But for some people that actually do this for a living, it kind of does matter. Dana Dioria, she's one of those, I believe, co-CIO at Investnet in Berwyn, PA. I'm a big fan of Berwyn, PA, that whole part of the state. Dana, thanks so much for joining us here. I mean, do you care when the Fed starts cutting rates? How do you viewing the Fed? Because we're going to hear from the Fed next Wednesday.
I think I think given the fact that the market is pricing in to the point you just made, sort of this almost 50-50 at this point, I think we are getting to the point where exactly when that cut happens matters a little bit less than maybe it did. Obviously, we started the year and ended 2023 with much higher expectations of a March rate cut, which I never quite could square because we were also very sanguine about the possibility of a downturn, and that you saw more and more the priced in this notion of a soft landing. So the Fed, I mean, they on the one hand, you've got this massive debt we're carrying, and they're not oblivious to that. So cutting rates, is helpful there. But looking past that and just, their mandate, unemployment and inflation, unemployment does not suggest that they need to be cutting rates right now.
Right.
So I'm not one who thinks the Fed is oblivious to what's going on in markets, or that, they're just, but at this point they really have breathing room here. And so, Dana, I think it could go away, but I don't think they have to. Go ahead. Yes.
So Dana, I wonder maybe whether they cut in March matters to certain parts of the market. Clearly the front end, right? Maybe like 3-year notes. Does it matter to the stock market? I'm just trying to understand what's trading on what. So like what's going to be trading next Wednesday at, 2:15 p.m.?
I do think it matters. I mean, there's just, fundamentally, right? There's the whole, if you have longer dated cash flows and, so growthier stocks, for example, should tend to react negatively to higher rates because you are discounting back these longer dated cash flows at a higher rate. And so if I'm doing just a basic intrinsic value calculation, it should matter a lot to me if I have longer dated cash flows, if I have a lot of that value of my company is in the terminal value, that these rates that are higher for longer should negatively impact. Of course, that's one input, right, in a million inputs. And then, additionally, if we look at value stocks, for example, low price stocks, they're shorter duration in nature, so maybe it shouldn't impact them as much. But they also compete with bonds for they tend to be dividend yielders, and they compete with bonds, so higher rates impacts there. But I think this is one of many things going on. I think growth stocks. You talked about tech, or you've been talking about tech, communications, et cetera. And just where those companies stand in terms of like the defensive posture, the fact that they are looking at higher income and that they are revising up, whereas other companies are not. So it's one input in many.
All right, Dan, you mentioned fixed income here. How do you feel about the bond market here? It was just brutally crushed in 2022. Got some positive performance in 23 thanks to the last couple of months of the year. Kind of soft so far this year. How do you think about your allocation to fixed income?
Yeah, I think the starting point is so different, and we tend to be talking about it the same way as when we were starting at rates being rock bottom, and it's not the same, right? I mean, it's a very different starting point, no matter how you cut it. Even the route we kind of saw last year a little bit was short-lived, and to your point, you got the money back. If you're looking moment to moment at the correlation between stocks and bonds, then you're nervous about the issue to a certain extent because you're not seeing this hedging effect that maybe you're looking for. But if you just open the aperture a little bit in terms of the length of time you have, I'm a strong believer in still having a robust bond allocation, particularly now, because again, I mean, there's only so far rates can go one way or the other at this point. It's not like it was, starting again from a rock bottom and, massive increases that you have to stomach. So I see that allocation as being necessary, as being good ballast for a portfolio, and there's not the danger there that there was.
Do you like tech?
I love the question. You can't not like tech. I'm a person who says tilt a little because you're getting so much tech, whether you're in an index or you're, even actively managed, they can't get that far away. It's too big. It's too much a part of the index. So I am a person who will say tilt a little bit towards, some companies, lower priced companies, just to offset some of that, concentration risk. But you can't get away from tech. You need it, and you can't be too far on the tracking error.
So, Dana, we're kind of just getting to the teeth here of earnings. I haven't seen the actual numbers per se, but it just feels kind of meh to me. Some companies are doing okay, some companies not. What are you looking for this earnings season?
I think you're right. That's the exact right word that and I don't think that's a super big surprise, right? Because even if we stick the landing, there to some extent, we should expect corporate America to have some impact from the fact that you've had this massive increase in interest rates, that they have to contend with inflationary increases. A lot of these things can be lagged in terms of their effects. So, I mean, we can't expect to, hit the lights out every single time. And, even if the market is kind of absorbing this, and even if we're seeing that, wow, inflation actually is coming in. I mean, had another good print, in terms of just where we want to be. We're moving our way to the 2%. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's almost too good to be true to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, corporations, it's a varied landscape. They're all dealing with different parts of that inflationary increase, parts of what it means to go back to bond markets. So I'm not surprised. I think the 2024 forecasts matter a lot. What do we expect by the end of this year? Yeah. And that'll tell you something about whether we're trending toward recession after all.
All right. Dana, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Dana Dioria, co-CIO of InvestNet, joining us there. So here's a fun headline. Yep. Carnival down almost 2%.
I see this.
They issue a 10K. They warn the Red Sea instability could impact operations. That is spreading from industry to industry. But also, who cruises there?
Yeah, I would say who cruises, although I would like to cruise through the Suez Canal, but what I'd really like to do is take a cruise through the Panama Canal. and they do that.
Ooh, really?
Yeah, great
that's
book on the
interesting.
Panama Canal.
I feel like that's weird because if you can't get goods through it because of water levels, you're going to take a cruise?
Yeah, I don't know how that happens, but they do that, and I would like to see that because I'd like to just see. I think it's like a bucket list thing. Go see the Panama Canal. That would be pretty cool. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom with company news we're following this morning. Spirit pushing back against JetBlue's termination warning. In a statement, the company says, you know what, there's no basis for terminating their merger agreement. Spirit says it will continue to abide by the agreement and expects JetBlue to do the same. JetBlue warned of terminating the agreement on or after January 28th. Save shares right now 16% lower. And then you have Intel. Those shares, they are down close to 11%, the most in more than 2 years. They delivered that disappointing forecast. So this renews doubts about a long-promised turnaround at the once dominant chip maker. One investor said this morning, you know what? All they produce at this point are commoditized chips. Intel's first quarter projection for both sales and profit coming in well short of Wall Street estimates. Executives struggling to soothe concerns during the conference call that they had with analysts. The outlook suggests that the chief officer, Pat Gelsinger, still has a long way to go in restoring their former prowess. The J.P. Morgan Chase CEO, Jamie Dimon, moving some of his top lieutenants into new senior roles. So he's positioning them for more experience running the firm's operation as he prepares potential successors. And data breaches, they continue at an alarming upsurge, an alarming pace. The financial and reputational harm suffered by targeted companies remains staggering. In the healthcare sector alone, there were was a 239% increase in the number of large data breaches in 2023. And on average, each data breach is costing firms $4.5 million. And that's a look at your company news. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets here, the S&P 500, we're seeing a little bit of a lift here, up 0.2%. The NASDAQ up about 0.1%. So a little bit of a lift off of some pretty good inflation data, I would say, here today. 2.9% on the core. That's below 3%, and that's getting close to the kind of Fed would like to see it closer to 2%. The two-year Treasury is up 5 basis points, 4.34%, I should say. WTI crude oil taking a little bit of a pause here, off about 0.2%, still elevated at $77, about 18 cents here. So we keep an eye on that. Bitcoin, let's call it out. Tom Keene's not here. Up 3.5%, 41,300 on Bitcoin. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C., World and National News with Amy Carson.
All right, thanks you, Paul. A few minutes after arriving in a New York courtroom, Donald Trump got up and left as closing statements began in his defamation trial versus writer E. Jean Carroll. Trump's departure drew the ire of the judge, who noted for the record that Trump had left and ordered his lawyers to stay. Earlier, Trump and his lawyer were actually late for the start of those proceedings. The United Nations Human Rights Office is speaking out about last night's execution of Alabama death row inmate Kenneth Smith by nitrogen gas. UN Human Rights spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani.
We are very worried that this could open the door to further executions, and this is why we feel the need to speak out again clearly that this is not acceptable.
This was the first time this new method of execution has been used. The UN says it could amount to torture in violation of international human rights law. A Moscow court has extended the pretrial detention of Evan Gershkovich through March. Gershkovich is an American citizen, a journalist who works for the Wall Street Journal. Russia has accused him of espionage, but has not provided any evidence. Gershkovich and his employer deny it, and the U.S. has declared him to be wrongfully detained. NASA's space helicopter Ingenuity deployed to Mars back in 2021 and has now flown its last mission. The 4-pound solar-powered aircraft flew 72 times in its time on the Martian surface. It was only supposed to fly 5. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson.
What started as a technology demonstration with plans for only up to 5 flights has now completed a remarkable 72 flights on Mars.
Administrator Nelson posted a video message on social media to say Ingenuity has earned its place in history. King Charles III is at a London hospital to undergo surgery for an enlarged prostate. He was diagnosed last week and reportedly decided to go public so other men who may be experiencing similar symptoms would be inspired to seek medical attention. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Alex.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Hey, Alex, you know, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it highlighted the need that Europe's going to have for energy. One of the sources was liquefied natural gas. We have a lot of it. We're now an net exporter of energy in this country. We could step in.
We did.
We did.
We did
and
step in.
That's cool. And that I learned all about LNG.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. And now the Biden administration is putting a little bit of wrench in this. So
Yeah,
they announced on Friday that they halted the approval of new licenses to export U.S. LNG while it scrutinizes how shipments affect climate change, the economy, and national security. Okay, fine.
Yep.
The rules haven't been rethought since 2018. You want to rethink them? Okay, go ahead. The projects that are underway can still happen, but there's still a bunch of projects that are going to be waiting in the queue now. And I mean, it's hard to look at this and not think that it's political. Right. So the environmentalists are going to get a little bit of love, particularly after President Biden approved the Alaska oil project with Conoco. So you have to wonder if this is just like bide our time, give it 9 months, and then once the election's over, you can speed it up. Because honestly, my opinion here, it's bananas.
Yeah.
It's total bananas. Like, you want to work on methane leaks? Go for it. You want to plug some holes? Definitely do that. But like, what is Europe going to do if the U.S. can't export LNG?
That's right. I mean, and it comes from the shale, right? A lot of it comes from the shale. The natural gas comes from the fracking of the shale.
Yes, but also the Appalachia Basin. So the Northeast has a ton of gas fields. And it what makes gas here so cheap. And you got to export it. And it takes a long time to build, and it's real expensive.
Yeah, I just love that. You know, and then over there, once you get it over to Europe, you have to put it back into a gas form, right?
You do.
Man,
you do. So you cool it down,
See,
it gets solid, you put it on a vessel, and then you put it on there, and then you put it back into gas, and then you put it on a pipeline. Super cool.
Smart people in the energy field. All right, we're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to finish it strong. It's Friday. That means we talk municipal bonds, Matt Miller's favorite segment of the week. We're keeping it, even though Matt's flown the coop. He's a paternity leave or something like that. Eric Kazatsky's going to join us. He covers all the muni stuff for Bloomberg Intelligence. And then the highlight of the morning, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow is going to speak with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger on the company's earnings. Disappointing earnings. The stock's trading off very heavily today. So we're going to get the lay of the land from the CEO. So that is a must-listen to segment, as is our next. That's John Tucker kicking this whole thing off with the Bloomberg Business Fund.
And let's start you with the major averages, all green right now. The S&P 500 had been bouncing between gains and losses. You have 9 of the 11 major industry groups in the index higher. Just 2 are lower. American Express is the leader in terms of index points. That's up over 8% after their earnings report. Intel, the big laggard, that's down almost 11% after the disappointing earnings report there. Over at CFRA, Sam Stovall is advising investors, you know what? Stick with the winners.
Communication services, consumer discretionary technology, which as a group was up more than 50%. Yet following an up year, you want to let your winners ride, which would include those 3 sectors. Also, financials is one that is doing well and would therefore be a let your winners ride candidate.
And the data, the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure, that has reached an almost 3-year low. The data cap a year that saw inflation retreat faster than the Fed officials had even anticipated. Right now, the S&P 500, 10 points higher. That's up 0.2%. 4904 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 139 points. The NASDAQ 100 right now, that is down 13 points, down about 0.1%. 2-year yield, that's rising right now, 5 basis points higher, 434 in the 2-year. The 10-year, the benchmark, that's up 3 basis points. That's at 414. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker it is. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. We're also in CarPlay, the Android Auto. I mean, the technology distribution is like crazy these days. Yeah, Sirius XM. So it's pretty much everywhere. If you want to listen to Bloomberg Radio, see Bloomberg Radio, no excuse because it's out there, baby. Looking at the markets here, as John was just mentioning, a little bit of green on the screen here. Not crazy, but certainly better than we saw earlier this morning. Let's dig under the hood and see where we're getting some stock-specific moves. We do that with our good buddy Norma Linda. She's the equities reporter for Bloomberg News. Nora, what do you got?
So we are now into credit card earnings season. So I'm taking a look at American Express, as John mentioned a little bit earlier. It is the biggest gainer in the S&P 500 right now. That stock is jumping as much as 8.7%, surpassing an all-time high last set in 2022. The credit card company forecasts EPS for 2024 that beat the average analyst estimate. We've got an analyst over at HSBC saying that the quarterly results and guidance reflect the strength of American Express, their financial model, and that they acknowledge that the revenue growth is being increasingly driven by NII and that billed business growth is moderating.
I mean, but also isn't it just their customers are richer than other people's?
I mean,
like at the end of the day,
I'd
like,
say so.
Like they have like huge fees, right? The platinum card, etc. I mean, they're going to do better in a downturn. Like at the end of the day, it's just income inequality for Amex.
Right, and if you think about so many corporations that use Amex, you know, I think that there's so many customers, a large customer base there that's willing to pay.
Stock's all-time high, by the way. I just pulled up the chart and did the max function.
You also have your wallet out right now. What's going on?
Because I couldn't even tell you what I had. Like, I got the gold card. I've had it since like forever. 80 something. But I don't use Amex that much.
I do, because of the Delta points.
So many perks.
The perks. See, I'm not a good perks person. My daughter's very good. She
What's the yearly fee on that thing?
I don't know.
On the gold, I don't know. I think the platinum that we have is like 500, I think.
Oh.
But the perks, this is so crazy. The perks just go to my husband because the card's under his name because he is older and has been a customer longer. But then I don't get any of the perks, even though I do all the spending. Also, because
I don't have to work on that.
It's definitely biased to the men in a relationship. I'm just saying. What else you got? Intel.
Looking at Intel, the chip maker is seeing quite the sell-off after it forecasts for the first quarter sales and profits that disappointed investors. We've really been talking about this all day, and as we know, our very own Ed Ledlow will be speaking with the CEO coming up shortly. But it was a long-promised turnaround for the once dominant chip maker, and essentially the market is disappointed that they're not seeing the results that they had expected to see in terms of forecasts. So shares of Intel are down as much as 13%, plunging for their worst single-day drop since July of 2020.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, we'll hear from the CEO at 11:20, approximately.
He's going to be like, give me time, give me time, give me time, give me time. That's going to be the message.
All right, Stuart Poll writes in $250 annual fee on the gold card.
Oh, did you know that?
I did not know that.
Do you want me to show you how to do the rewards thing? I'll show you that in break.
All
Okay.
right,
You got to download the app though first.
Everybody just takes my money. It's
We're working on it.
You're going to have to give a tutorial on air for everyone.
Yeah, but I got to cash. So
He does. You take it out and you look at it sometimes.
I look
You
at my
put it back
cash
in
because
your
I'm a Wall Street guy. I'll sit there and count money. What's a more fun thing to do than count your money? That's what we do on Wall Street.
He's counting money live on air and on your
First job.
I love it.
First job at Payne Weber on a block trading desk. Johnny Coughlin, head trader. Never graduated college, but was one of the best traders on the street. Made a ton of money. Would pull out a wad like 4 or 5 inches thick. No kidding. All hundreds, all 50s. Rip them off. Throw them to the junior traders and say, "Hey, go out and get me some lunch." And we did. It worked great.
Now you're a cash guy. You still like.
I am a cash guy, but I'll tell you, during the pandemic, I became less of a cash guy. But I'm still a cash guy. I'm still a cash guy. You go down to the Jersey Shore bars, they don't do.
It's true.
They don't do this Apple Pay. You got to rip off a 50, put it on the bar, like you've been there before, and that's how you do it.
So he takes out his money, but then he's not giving it to us, John.
I know,
He's
share
like,
the
go buy
wealth.
lunch.
Really
Like, what's up
left
with
out.
that?
Share the wealth.
Exactly.
All right, the last stock we're looking at here is Spirit and JetBlue.
Yes.
Spirit saying that they really think that the merger can happen. Wishful thinking.
Right. I mean, we just saw a headline come out saying that it believes that there is no basis for terminating that JetBlue deal. Really interesting stuff here. We've got Spirit shares tumbling as much as 21%. We know that this has really been in flux. Is the deal going to happen? Is it not? I mean, it's being blocked by judges, but they're saying that they think they can appeal. We'll see where all that settles. But we do have the CEO of JetBlue really trying to cling to this, and clearly Spirit as well.
All right, we're going to get Jen Reed in here at some point soon on this. Jen Reed covers all the antitrust issues. She's a lawyer, a reformed lawyer. She says she'll give us the latest on what's going on here. But it's been tough to get deals approved here. The regulators they're not playing around anymore. So anyway, thanks very much, Nora. We appreciate that, Nora Melinda, giving us the latest on what's happening in the stock market. Eric Kazatsky, is he around? Do we have him?
Yeah, but say this is Bloomberg first because we got to play the
we gotta do that.
sound. It's a
Thank you very
fancy
much.
thing. You're welcome.
You're a professional. This is Bloomberg.
Now on Bloomberg Markets, Munis in Focus.
That's right. It is Friday. We talk municipal bonds, and I know we've probably got a billboard here, so we'll figure it out. It's in the chat.
It is brought to you by Build America Mutual, insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of Building America. Invest in BAM insured bonds.
No, that's BAM.
No, BAM insured bonds? Okay.
Yeah.
That's my first
and Matt will
billboard,
take
man.
the BAM to like the nth level. And we did go spend some time with our good friends at Build America Mutual. We did a remote broadcast from our good friend. They insure municipal bonds. So if you're concerned about the issuer, you buy insured municipal bonds. I didn't know that was
They're
a
like
thing.
the reinsurers of municipal bonds?
No, I mean, if you don't think the XYZ municipality is going to pay you back because maybe they're a little shady, maybe you don't think they're, you get insurance on it. And so apparently it's a thing. So we checked that with them. Eric Kazatsky joins us, senior U.S. municipal strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence. Joins us here from the Bloomberg Intelligence HQ in Princeton, New Jersey. It used to be New York, which we fought so hard for, but now they've retreated to Princeton. Eric, thanks so much for joining us here.
Yeah.
What's going on in the municipal bond market here these days? What are the headlines?
You know what? We're just enjoying the starts of this new year and trying to noodle on the different headlines that we've been sort of thrown our way, right? So we had some speculation that there were some credit issues with Harvard. I think we've sort of safely put that to rest at this point, that they're going to be around for probably another several hundred years. And obviously, we're getting a lot of questions on what's going on the southern border and how that would impact the states. Obviously, we're not of the opinion that there's going to be a secession issue on the behalf of Texas, but it does bring up a larger conversation. What could happen when you have states sort of, going with battle to the federal government when there's so much at play as far as tax revenues going in each direction?
I love Eric because he can have energy and excitement about munis.
Sure.
Unrivaled in my 17-year career covering stuff in the markets. Eric, can we go to the fun topic of the election? Because it also kind of ties into the border issue. And I'm just wondering, how are we sort of prepping? How's the muni market thinking about a possible President Trump again?
You know what? I don't think it would be the worst thing for the muni market in the fact that we already sort of know what we're going to get, right? So Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came into play 2017. We're still dealing with that. A lot of the provisions are set to sunset in 2025. So if the fact that we do have another dose of President Trump coming in, we can expect a lot of those provisions to, become permanent and stay in place. Not great for the muni market in the sense that corporate tax rates will stay low, and that really does tamper demand from some of those buyers who used to really play in our market.
Hey, Eric, talking to you and reading your research, I learned about taxable municipal bonds. I didn't know that was a thing until...
Wait, really?
Yes. Talk to us about that market. How's that performing here?
Yeah, on a performance basis, slightly outperforming corporates. But I think the real thing to focus on when you're looking at taxable munis is the different credit aspect, right? So totally asymmetric credit risk bucket to corporates, and the fact that you're picking up another like 20, 30 basis points of yield right now. So if we think the Fed's going to cut, now's the time to sort of jump into bonds because of a scarcity issue. I want to be grabbing more yield in a safer area to play, and taxable munis would check off a bunch of those boxes.
What do you think the tax code will be that may or may not impact munis, though? I thought the whole point, weren't they tax-free? Isn't that the whole point?
Well, sure, they are tax-free, right? But I think what we're expecting, regardless if it's a Republican or Democrat to come into the White House, is that individual tax rates are most likely going to go higher. With the amount of federal deficits that they're contending with, it really only makes sense that that's the path that we're going to head on. And at the end of the day, if taxes go higher, it's going to make municipal bonds a lot more desirable as sort of the last bastion of sort of, seeking a tax exemption for individuals.
You mentioned higher education here, and you have a note out, munis might have 99 problems, but Ivy League schools aren't one of them. Talk to us about that part of the market, that issuance category. Higher education, how often do they use the muni market, and are they good investments?
Yeah, so, it really is sort of a bifurcated world when it comes to higher education. And it was one of the areas that we had a little bit of concern going into the year, but it's a story of have and have nots, right? So you have the AAA credits of the world, the Harvards, the Yales, who have tens of billions of dollars in endowments. And then you have schools like, Penn State, who are not 501c3. No, I'm a state school guy myself, except it was Pitt.
I wrote a lot of tuition checks at Penn State.
There you go. So, look, I mean, the credit profile of those two different schools is very, very different. We think their concern is really the less funded private education four-year institutions who really can't withstand, sort of a drop in enrollment year after year after year. That's where we're going to see some spread widening.
Spread widening. I like that you took us there, because what we've seen in the investment grade market, for example, is just compression in the spread. Like no matter what, there's been that compression. Why are we seeing munis widening? Like what's going on there? Walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a race to quality this year, and that's why we're seeing, much of the grabbiness going on is going to be in the AA and AAA names that are coming to market. Washington GO was an issue that just did very well, both in the primary and secondary. But I think what's happening in our market, and sort of echo with corporates, is that, you are seeing an overall tightening of spreads just due to supply and demand imbalance. And it's really been a theme for munis, I would say, dating back to 2017 at this point.
Eric, I'm thinking about my buddies on the new issuance market. How's the new issuance market look for 2024? How's the calendar look?
I mean, pretty full, and surprisingly so. I think a lot of the estimates for supply coming into this year across the board were it was going to be on the quieter side, but I've been surprised by the amount of preliminary new issue filings that have come out, and pretty sizable deals as well, right? We have some stuff in the high yield space, another bright line train issue coming, bridging the gap between California and Vegas, so that's going to be interesting to watch. Yeah, and the Massachusetts Children's Hospital deal, a subsector of healthcare that we always find interesting. So definitely something for everyone on the calendar.
What happens if the Fed cuts rates? More issuance? Like what's the knock-on effect?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, our market can't do advanced refunding. So it's not like if I have a mortgage and rates drop, I can refi anything, right? So on that aspect, we're not going to see a lot. But I do think to some degree that there's market timing going on in our space. And a lot of people didn't like the market last year. So if we have, 3, 4 rate cuts, you could definitely see some more stuff pop on the calendar.
So what's the credit quality like out there in municipal bond land? I haven't heard of any big blowups recently.
And you probably won't, right? At least from the credit raters' perspective. They continue to sort of march higher as far as positive outlooks on the credits that we long have held to sort of be the bad boys of the municipal space, right? The Illinois and Chicago's of the world. So as long as sort of the opinion over the next several fiscal periods is that they're going to continue to pay their bonds, I think all is going to be well when it comes to credit quality in our space.
Here's a question that may tie into politics also. So clearly the Inflation Reduction Act is trying to be a catalyst for investment, and you're seeing a lot of red states get a lot of that investment, whether it's even with the CHIPS Act or it's building a new facility or battery storage, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, with Republicans talking a lot about wanting to repeal that, whether or not it actually happens, what would like a South Carolina do if all of a sudden they lost all this investment helped by the IRA and the CHIPS Act?
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking to the fact that they haven't done a lot of issuance, even with those matching funds available to this point, speaks to the fact of that market timing we just mentioned. But if they had to go at it alone, I think they'd find a very receptive municipal market who'd be happy to finance them at very competitive rates. So, the availability of money to finance the amount of things that actually need to get financed in our space, there's no shortage of that.
Wow.
So what are the sectors you like here? I mean, do investors in your world, did they look at sectors like I want to be in healthcare or I want to be in transportation? How does that typically work?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of the products in our area, they're trying to beat an index, right? And it's sort of broad-based. But yeah, there are definitely investment vehicles that are focused on sectors. Some of the sectors that we think are going to be more interesting this year are healthcare, right? Shaking off some of that pandemic pain they've been dealing with the past several periods, right? And hopefully what we think is going to happen is a little bit of spread tightening based on some, more normal margins coming back to the space.
All right, very good. Eric Kozaski joins us, Senior U.S. Municipals Strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us off the Princeton desk. We appreciate that. Looking at Intel here, continues to trade off. We're going to have Pat Gelsinger, the CEO, coming on in just moments with Bloomberg's own Ed Ludlow. We want to get a little bit of a preview and kind of get a sense from the Wall Street perspective, kind of what's the view on Intel in the quarter, and we can do that with Bloomberg's senior semiconductor analyst, Kunjan Sobhani. He's based out there in San Francisco, right in Silicon Valley. So, Kunjan, you've been covering this company, this space for a long time. What happened at Intel last night with their numbers?
Yeah, so the bottom line was the negatives more than offset the positives. We were not expecting such a grim outlook, especially in their PCs and their server business. That was more upsetting than the weakness across their networking or telco business, which we kind of were aware of a little bit.
Kunjan, how much of a plea are we going to get from Pat Gelsinger in just about a couple minutes' time? We talked to him on radio and TV about just, guys, give me time. I got this. Give me some time.
Exactly. I mean, look, we have seen this happen a couple of times over the last 2-3 years where there has been a moment where they've asked to hit the reset button. We didn't expect it this time. There were some positives, right? They've been making good progress on the 5 nodes in 4 years. So I expect him to keep the conversation on the positives and forward-looking. I expect him to really tout the AI PC thing and their work they're doing in the Gaudi accelerators. So definitely he'll keep the focus on the long term and the outward.
So where are they just competitively positioned? Do they have a good product offering?
Look, they are late to the game. That's a fact. And also the $2 billion pipeline, not revenue. For Intel scale, that's really small, while their peers are taking up significant billions of dollars right now in 2024 in the AI. And the more the wallet share goes to AI, it's taking away share from Intel's traditional server business.
Yeah, sounds like challenger from a product line perspective.
Yeah, true. Kunjan, we 30 seconds. What's your question for Pat Gelsinger?
I would like to know more about the revenue ramp of the accelerator pipeline rather than just the pipeline increasing. I think that would really help raise confidence in that product, especially given the importance of AI right now.
All right, Kunjan, thanks so much for jumping on with us. Kunjan Sobhani, he is the technology analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's out there in San Francisco. He covers the semiconductor, the chip makers for Bloomberg Intelligence, and just getting some thoughts there. The stock is off 10.7% today. The good news is up 50% on a trailing 12-month basis, but again, the street really disappointed with some of the numbers and the guidance they got last night. So let's get the latest right from the company itself. Bloomberg's own Ed Ludlow. He is out speaking with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, talking about the quarter, talking about the future for INTC.
Welcome to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide. The focus, Intel and the chip makers' earnings, a forecast for the current period that makes the market nervous about Pat Gelsinger's turnaround plan for Intel, some worry about its data center business and a fledgling foundry business. I'm delighted to say we are joined by Pat Gelsinger, Intel's CEO. Pat, the stock is down more than 10%. What is it that the market is not understanding here for Intel?
Well, thanks, Ed, and always a pleasure to be with you and Carolyn on the show. First, we finished a great year. We had Q4, a beat on top and bottom line, finishing a year that was comfortably ahead, and showing the transformation journey that we're on. And we believe we're putting points on the board for a long-term transformation of this iconic company. In light of that, hey, the Q1, at the low end of seasonal. So we think the market reaction is a bit overstated in that respect. We understand it, but our company, our employees are doing an incredible job at delivering our process technology, restoring product leadership, defining new categories like the AI PC. We're on a multi-year journey, and we're not going to be judged on a 90-day shot clock. We are out to rebuild this company, and we had a great 23, and I'm confident in a great 24 for this company.
Pat, there were so many questions on the call about your foundry business, and for our global audience, that's the sort of contract manufacturing business where you make chips for others. You seem to say that you didn't get as many committed dollars as you thought you might, and I wonder what's standing in the way of that. Customers committing to backing your foundry business.
Yeah, and we're very comfortable with the progress. We said that we'd have one on our leading edge node, 18A, as it's called. Momentum in our packaging business, where we now have 5 major customers on our advanced packaging technology. And we said, hey, we went from $4 billion to over $10 billion of lifetime deal value. So good momentum, but most importantly, is the process technology itself. Are we back to a leadership technology? And we're hitting all the milestones, this audacious 5 nodes and 4-year plan. And all of the milestones are on track to have us back to process leadership in 25. And as I say, a foundry company, they want to know that if they design on us, they can build the best products. And we're gaining momentum in delivering on exactly that promise. And so proud of my teams for delivering on such an audacious plan. We're on track.
What about track for AI accelerators? Not just AI on the PC, but I put it bluntly, Pat, NVIDIA's run away with this. When or can you regain any sort of leadership in that space?
Yeah, and clearly that's been an area of strength for them. We appreciate that they've, as I say, focused on that for many years, and the market has come their way in a strong way. But our roadmap is gaining momentum. Gaudi 2, we said we're seeing a significant expansion in the customer pipeline that we have. We're ramping up supply. So I'll say we're chasing to have enough supply, to meet market. And we're well underway on our next generation, Gaudi 3, as it's called, with 4x the compute, 2x the network in the lab, gaining, really, really good early debug in bringing that product to market later this year. So we feel like, hey, yes, we have a lot of work to do here, but the momentum is building. The market is looking for alternatives, and our roadmap is strengthening as we go through the year. But more importantly, Carolyn, is this idea that last year was the year of high-end training. This year, it's about how do I use those models? And that's much more about the enterprise strength where Intel is at the edge, in the PC, and in the enterprise data center. So we see the market coming our way in AI in 24 and 25.
And let's go to that core segment. Let's go to data centers, because you have promised that you are not losing market share there. How do you show that evidence of that, Pat?
In Q4, our estimates are we are about flat in market share in Q4. So clearly we lost share, weakness of products, but that's now being overcome. We are executing on our product roadmap, and we're ahead of schedule on the products for 24. We're seeing great momentum for the 2024 product line, good execution. And I'm very happy to say we sent our first 2025 product on 18A already into fab ahead of schedule. So our execution momentum is building. We see that we've stabilized our market share, and now it's time for us to rebuild where we were before, and we have the products and the strength to go do it. Really proud of our team's progress here.
For our Bloomberg television and radio audience worldwide, we're speaking with the Intel CEO, Pat Gelsinger. And Pat, when I've been down to Santa Clara and sort of seen the reality of Intel, it always strikes me as being more multifaceted than, say, NVIDIA, right, on its high-end performance GPU. A part of that is the packaging. A part of that is your differentiation with Foundry. But I go back to Caroline's point on the core business. What seems to be happening in the context of data center is CPU. And I just wondered if you'd explain to our audience what you think is happening in that market, specifically on the CPU side.
Yeah, and then the CPU, last year was clearly a year there was more energy on the GPU, right, for these high-end training systems. But as we come into this year, we think there's going to be more balance between the CPU and the accelerator marketplace. Clearly, we're going to be participating more in the accelerator, but the strength of Intel has been our Xeon, the core data center CPU. And, you know, coming out of World Economic Forum and Davos and CES, I probably met with 50 customers. And the enthusiasm that they have and the traditional strength that Intel has in the enterprise. And, you know, we're in year 20 of the cloud, Ed, and 60% of computing is in the cloud, but 80% of the data remains on-prem in the enterprise data center. That's where Intel is uniquely strong, and our CPUs and accelerators are going to unlock that capability for our customers. This is an exciting time for us to really enable them to use those models, and that's a strength for Intel and our CPUs.
Pat, when I look at the cloud and the hyperscalers themselves, the really interesting story is their in-house design work and their in-house silicon progress. Do you consider that a factor in how your own business in the data center and cloud side performed and how you think it will perform going forward?
Yeah, and one of the things that I said, Ed, is Intel has the opportunity of 100% of the AI market for it, because we're going to have our product offerings. Xeon is strong, showing up with greater improvement in our accelerator product line. But we're also going to be a foundry. And all of those internal programs that you see at Amazon and at Google and at Microsoft, hey, I want to be the foundry for those. And all of the competitors' products, I want to be the foundry for them, as well as we're seeing the momentum of our packaging technology. So when you think about it that way, Intel uniquely is the company that has the opportunity to participate in 100% of the AI market with our products and our foundry. And that's exactly what we're intent upon doing.
Has any of the weakness in demand thus far been because of this in-house design and build commitment from some of these companies? Or have you already managed to sort of seal verbal approval that you'll be doing these for them from a foundry business?
You know, at this point, I'd say it's pretty early. I don't think it's really affected the market that much, Carolyn, so far. But I do think this forward-looking view is a unique one for Intel, that we do get to participate in both sides of that market. There's a lot of energy here as the cloud vendors are saying, how do I have a more cost-effective solution for these large training and inferencing demands of generative AI? And for that, every one of them has these projects underway, and we're engaging with all of them as we speak. So I really see that as a long-term opportunity. It takes multiple years for those to materialize, but our technologies, as they gain momentum, are showing up at just the right time to satisfy a unique AI market for those cloud vendors.
And we've just been hearing how, you know, within this change that we see around AI, so comes a change in talent in many of these companies. Are you in any way having to reorientate your own workers, your own colleagues, Pat? Are you having to let go of people?
Well, every day it's focused on talent. And in the technology industry, Carolyn, talent, right, as one of our CFOs used to say, he said, we start with sand, right, the second most plentiful material on earth, and everything else is talent between then and delivering our products and technology. So this idea of talent is so critical to our markets. Now, Intel has a well-tenured and very capable base in both software and in hardware, but we're reorienting them very fast to the AI requirements, to data skills, to software skills, but we build on a very firm foundation. And we're making good moves to bring additional talent into the company as well, to continue to have the best people to do the best products, to enable the best customer experience that they could possibly have. And a great example of that is the AI PC, where we're unquestionably defining the category, have a strong roadmap, and delivering on it at scale with ISVs and our OEMs in the marketplace today.
Pat, before we let you go, you mentioned 18A. You in the past have been kind and explained to me what it takes to jump generation to generation on the manufacturing side and kind of the process to retain and regain technology leadership. So in the small time we have left, what evidence do you have that that beautiful chart you drew for me on the whiteboard is playing out the way that you expected to?
Well, we delivered the design collateral. It's called a PDK in Q4 of last year. We've seen our customers expand against that. And most importantly, we sent our first major product into the fab just before earnings call started ahead of schedule. And if you could take a big processor design like a server chip and send it with stable design rules into manufacturing, that's a pretty definitive statement of momentum. And we're adding customers, and we have 75 test chips in the plan right now. So lots of customers are saying, let me try my design. And importantly, we have our Foundry Day, this opening of the doors of Intel Foundry coming up in February. So a moment for the ecosystem, the EDA partners, the IP providers, and our customers to show up and see the progress that we're making. And for the first time, we'll talk about what comes after 18A. We're not finished. The Moore's Law, we are the stewards. Until the periodic table is exhausted, we ain't finished. And we're confident we're the company that's going to keep innovating in process technology for decades to come.
Moore's Law, indeed. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, thank you.
All right, that's Ed Ludlow, Caroline Hyde, Bloomberg Television, speaking with Pat Gelsinger, CEO of Intel, after their quarterly numbers. We're going to bring back Kunjan Sobhani. He's the tech analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Hey, Kunjan, just real quick here. You listen to that. Mr. Gelsinger seems pretty confident. What do you think? Well, I guess Kunjan drops. It's okay. We'll get his opinion next time. But I'll tell you, I guess my takeaway was they feel confident in their product lineup. They feel confident that they can be a player in AI. The street, obviously, less so. Although I will note, over the trailing 12 months, stock is up 50%. The street was buying it.
Yeah.
But now I guess what we're seeing in the stock is just a reaction to their guidance.
Well, also, I mean, they had a 52-week high like in December.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
if context.
Yeah,
context is important.
Context changes everything.
Yes,
Paul.
it does.
And in terms of the stock, maybe it actually does.
Absolutely. All right, we got the S&P 500 up 0.2%, the Dow up 0.3%, NASDAQ kind of unchanged here, we will call it. The 10-year Treasury 4.13%, up about 2 basis points here today. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. We'll get rolled in national news with Immerse.
All right, thank you, Paul and Alex. The UN's top court has stopped short of ordering a ceasefire in Gaza, but in a case brought by South Africa accusing Israel of genocide, the International Court of Justice at The Hague has ruled that Israel must take steps to prevent such acts. ICJ President Justice Joan Donoghue says the court calls for the release of all Israeli hostages taken in the October attack.
It is gravely concerned about the fate of the hostages abducted during the attack in Israel and calls for their immediate and unconditional release.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is fighting a just war. GOP frontrunner former President Donald Trump calling for Senate Republicans to not make a deal with Democrats on border security so he can deny President Biden a legislative victory ahead of the elections. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin criticized Trump for discouraging a deal.
Former President Trump saying, don't fix the border, okay, because that'll be something I can use for campaign. You're going to let people basically come and continue to our country because you don't want to fix something for your political purposes? That's not the right reason for running.
Senator Manchin has been the focus of speculation that he would run for president as part of a bipartisan unity ticket. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the Justice Department has expanded coverage under the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program to include mental health support.
Coverage through that program now extends to officers who are permanently and totally disabled due to certain mental health disorders, as well as to those who die by suicide as a result of exposure to traumatic events that they encounter while on duty.
The Howie Lieben Foundation is a new organization. It is designed and aimed at supporting mental health and wellness for law enforcement officers. It is named for a former Capitol police officer who was there on January 6th. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, this is Bloomberg.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages mixed right now. You had 9 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500 higher. Now, Bloomberg Economics says the stage is set for the Fed to start cutting interest rates maybe as soon as March. The Federal Reserve's preferred gauge of underlying inflation cooling to an almost 3-year low. Despite the data that we got today, Phil Orlando at Federated Hermes is penciling in Fed rate cuts that'll be fewer and later than expected.
We are not in the 6-cut camp with the first cut coming in March. We're more on the 3-cut camp coming in the back half of the year. Personally, I like that first cut in July.
American Express said it's sticking to its long-term profit and revenue goals. Forecast earnings for 2024 topping analyst estimates. It's up about 7.5%, the best performing stock in the S&P 500. And then you have Intel, the disappointing earnings, meaning it's the worst performing stock right now in the S&P 500, down 11%. Overall, the S&P 500 up just 3 points right now, 48.97 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 95 points. The NASDAQ 100, 48 points lower. Yields are higher, 2-year space. That's up 5 basis points, 434. The benchmark 10-year yield, 2 basis points higher. That's at 414. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. Alex, I love the gaming business.
You do.
I like to roll some craps every once in a while. Not crazy, but I like to roll.
Were you like an M&A, like casino banker back in the day too?
I did a little bit of business there. And Steve Wynn, I'm not unfamiliar with Steve Wynn, and I invest anything that guy is building. And I did alongside Ron Barron back in the day. So that was very good. Bellagio, still, if anybody needs room, just go there. Give him my name. Take care of you.
I'll 100% do that.
But our next guest really does it for a living. Brian Egger, he is our senior gaming analyst. He covers all those casinos, all the hotels, the cruise lines, all that kind of good stuff. He's been doing it for decades on Wall Street. We got a Super Bowl coming up. The Super Bowl's in Vegas. That's got to be good for Vegas. Brian, how big?
Yeah, it's big. I mean, it's the first time Vegas is a host city. You know, I think if you look at other analogous types of big events, the Formula One Grand Prix back in November, what we saw for that event, November 23 versus 22, is you had table game revenue shot up, room rates shot up, slot revenue was a little weaker, but all the high-end business for both gaming and hotels certainly benefited. We'll see what it does to the bottom line in terms of how many rooms they gave away. We'll get a better sense of that during earnings season, but certainly from a top-line perspective, you know, these big events are really powerful, and the Super Bowl in Vegas, we expect the same.
So, Brian, we keep getting really solid economic data. The consumer is definitely spending. Are they still spending on experiences and stuff? And is that helping gambling and casinos?
They are. They're definitely spending on experiences. Vegas is a big beneficiary of that, both on the gaming side and the hotel side, and, you know, the convention business being back as well. Vegas is certainly up. Vegas is up very significantly versus 2019, but it is up also year over year. The comps get tougher, but it's definitely benefiting.
I mean, so Vegas, one of my favorite towns of all time.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah. 3 nights, it is my favorite place in the world. 4th night, I'm like, I'm done. So, I mean, the convention business, that's how most people get introduced to Vegas here, this convention business. So I know that's such a big part, and I know that's back. Is Vegas at the point where it always seems like they can't possibly think about building another big resort, yet they do?
Yes.
And they sell the rooms, and they get the rates. It's just amazing. Where are we in kind of the development of Vegas?
So the big recent opening was the Fontainebleau opened in December 13th. So that's a recent opening.
And where is that?
That's also the north part of the Las Vegas Strip.
Okay.
The old, yeah. So it's you know, and also we had back in 2 years earlier, you know, we had another major opening with Genting's Resorts World.
Right.
So we are seeing some development. In percentage growth terms, each of those openings is maybe a 2% increase in room supply.
Yep.
So it's nothing like back in the 90s when you had
Oh, yeah.
several openings in a quarter. but nevertheless, it is kind of filling out some
And
of
that's
the
when
spaces.
he was at DLJ, killing it on the street, doing all kinds of.
This was the opening parties
deals.
for the Luxor in 1993.
Okay, so speaking of the
Hating
opening
myself.
parties, Jody Laurie, who covers cruise lines and stuff, went on, what was it again?
Yeah.
Icon of the Seas.
Icon
yes.
of the Seas, right? And when talk about like here, something's opening, come join us. And she was saying the whole point of these cruise lines is they want to be Vegas on the seas. I mean, I'm
Yes.
extrapolating. But is the cruise line industry eating away at Vegas?
Yeah, so they all, first of all, I have to say, Jody went on a cruise and all he got is this lousy T-shirt.
Yes.
That's like,
We didn't even
I
get
did
a
not go on
T-shirt.
that cruise, right? I didn't even get a T-shirt, actually. But I mean, to the point, yes, I mean, they're all competing for the same discretionary dollar. Cruise lines are doing well. Vegas is doing well. In essence, they compete for a similar customer. The penetration expansion is a lot lower for cruise lines, but they're all benefiting, and we've yet to see the consumer roll over. Comps do get tougher, but the appetite for experiences and leisure travel remains very strong.
Talk to us about the sports betting business. It's legalized in so many states now. It's gotten so big, and it's listen to sports radio. It's every single ad. It's on television on all the big sporting events. It's just exploding. Talk to us about that business as a business of itself, and then maybe is that impacting kind of the sports books at some of these casinos?
Yeah, I think first of all, in terms of the business, Vermont just started up mobile sports betting this month. You had North Carolina recently. We're filling in all the states. There's more and more of it. The big challenge has been gaining profitability. So what they are doing is targeting promotions more effectively. They're reaching now the point of actual profitability, a much better point than they were a year ago. Companies like DraftKings. I don't really think it competes directly against brick and mortar sportsbooks. Maybe it does to some degree, but in markets where you do have both mobile and brick and mortar, mobile gets to such a bigger part of the pie.
Can I just share my story about gambling?
Sure.
So I went to the Bahamas with my husband, and we were at an Ultimate Texas Hold'em table. A 21-year-old got quad queens.
Wow.
And it was amazing. I know that's not sports betting, but that's like the moment you live for. Like, that's so cool. Like, he
Especially if you had a
cried
big
and
bet
called
out
his
there.
mom. It was so great. But for sports betting, how hard is it to understand, like, okay, it's legal here, it's not legal here? Like, does that get into difficulty when they're
It's true of the
reporting their
gaming
numbers?
industry generally. You're right that gaming is legalized and regulated on a state-by-state basis. It's true of casinos. It's true of sports books. Now we're seeing online sports betting legal in north of 25 states, right? So it's really a significant, something like 45% of the U.S. population has access to an online sports book. There are some states where it's not there yet, but since the Supreme Court blockade against this was lifted a few years back in 2018, we're really significantly expanded the industry. So it is maybe some confusion, but more and more it's becoming ubiquitous.
Yeah, I'm looking at the FA function for DraftKings. They're going to be, I guess, finally turn EBITDA positive this year for the first time. So these guys aren't even making any net income.
It took a while, and what happens is you introduce a sports book, takes a couple of years to reach maturation. You eventually build an audience, and you can take the promotions and giveaways down, and that's what they've done. So in states that are really mature, like New Jersey, been around 5 years, they're much more profitable than a newer state. But overall, look in the UK and Europe, you've got online gaming is more profitable, but it's a much more mature business.
Interesting.
That's so interesting.
I know. So, I mean, how about that? You also do some work on the regional casino companies that aren't in Vegas. How's that business doing?
They're doing well. I mean, it's still up
think riverboat casinos.
Yeah,
right?
well, not really, but usually not on riverboats anymore. But they're still.
Paul, we're Jersey guys.
They're still
you have
water
to ask
adjacent,
about Atlantic
right?
City.
They're near the water.
So depressing.
No, I didn't find AC that depressing last time I
Really?
went.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to see Amy
Well,
Poehler and Tina Fey. It was really fun.
I saw Sinatra down there 8 times during high school and college. Go ahead.
Okay, that's okay.
Really?
Yes. It's easy. We drive down.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, we're from the same era, so
Yeah.
I'm sure I did too back then. I think the original game business is doing well. It's still up well over the pre-pandemic. It's up year over year. I think the comps do get tougher. Just because we've seen so much growth, particularly. So, comps are a little tougher, but it's still doing well. I think the margin story gets tougher.
10 seconds on
labor,
AC. How's AC doing? 10 seconds.
AC is doing okay. I mean, it's like other regional markets. It's up year over year. The big challenge for all these regionals, I'll throw AC in there as well, is costs, competition.
All right.
labor
You're okay,
costs.
John? I got a little AC talk in there for you?
It's not Vegas. I don't. The people there just aren't as friendly as the people in Vegas.
No, they're just, the pit bosses, the dealers, they yell at you and stuff. But I have a good time when I go down there, so it's all good.
love
Brian
this
Egger covers all the
conversation.
gaming stuff for Bloomberg Intelligence. S&P 500 up 0.1%. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with a look at some of the company news. Well, we heard just a few minutes ago from CEO Pat Gelsinger. He sounded upbeat, but Intel tumbling the most in 2 years, delivering a disappointing forecast. Shares of Intel right now down close to 11%. This all renews doubts about a long-promised turnaround at the once dominant chip maker. Intel's first quarter projection for both sales and profit coming in well short of estimates. Executives struggling to soothe concerns. That was during the conference call with analysts. It suggests that the CEO still has a long way to go in restoring Intel's former prowess. Well, this is company news because they have to deal with labor. The Labor Department reports union membership continuing a decades-long decline, sliding to a record low last year. The story from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice. He says the data highlight a disconnect between strong public support for unions and the labor organization's ability to attract new members. That's even with major victories from Hollywood actors winning the biggest pay raise in 2 years to gains at Detroit's big three automakers. And Spirit pushing back against JetBlue's termination warning. In a statement today, the company says there's no basis for terminating their merger agreement. Spirit says it's going to continue to abide by the agreement and expects JetBlue to do the same. JetBlue has a different tune. They're warning of terminating the agreement on or after January 28th. And a moratorium this morning for the White House. The Biden administration halting the approval of new licenses to export liquefied natural gas. Gives the administration time to look at how shipments affect climate change, among other things. Going to affect a lot of projects, including Venture Global's CP2 export terminal planned for the Gulf Coast. That's a look at your company news. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets here, S&P 500 up 0.1%. The Dow's up 0.3%. The Nasdaq's pretty much unchanged here. We'll call out the Russell. The small capper is doing a little bit better as well, up 0.4%. WTI crude oil off a little more than 1%, $76.46. Yields a little bit higher here, lifting. 10-year Treasuries up about 2 basis points, 4.13%. And Tom Keane's not here, so let's talk Bitcoin, up 5%, just under $42,000 per token. So getting a little bit of a lift after a recent kind of a couple, maybe 10-day sell-off here. All right, right now let's head down to Washington, D.C. We'll get world and national news with Amy Mars.
All right, thank you, Paul. The Republican National Committee is withdrawing a draft resolution that would have declared former President Donald Trump the presumptive GOP nominee. Trump campaign originally supported the resolution following the former president's victory in New Hampshire. The proposal, though, resulted in a backlash. Trump himself later announced he opposed the resolution. The United Nations Human Rights Office is speaking out about last night's execution of Alabama death row inmate Kenneth Smith by nitrogen gas. UN Human Rights spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani.
Rather than looking for novel, untested methods to execute people, let's just bring an end to the death penalty. This is an anachronism that doesn't belong in the 21st century.
This was the first time this new method of execution's been used. The UN says it could amount to torture in violation of international human rights law. The head of the FBI is warning about a rising trend of crime committed by kids. FBI Director Christopher Wray says something has to be done so serious offenders are not turned loose as soon as they turn 19 years old.
Repeat violent offenders need to be held accountable, even if they're juveniles.
He says the FBI is aware of kids who've been radicalized by online videos, and he says there have been instances where the FBI was able to stop a juvenile just before they put their plan in action. The Biden administration has given Texas a deadline to allow federal agents back into a riverfront park along the border with Mexico, which is currently surrounded by fencing and razor wire. It is not clear what will happen if the governor does not comply by the end of today, which is the deadline. Governor Greg Abbott has already put out a statement saying the state has the right to self-defense. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Alex.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Alex, I love the big take stories for Bloomberg every day. They're
So good.
really cool topics that you're interested in. They do some deep, deep dives. A lot of great reporting, a lot of great sourcing, well written, of course. Lots of cool graphics, too. This one's on, Eli Lilly's $600 billion weight loss empire was late but lucky. So apparently they, decades ago, had identified this as an opportunity. Nobody was really paying attention to that researcher within Eli Lilly, but they're there now. The company's new obesity shot, Zepbound, is expected to be the best-selling drug of all time. So I'm looking at the Eli Lilly stock. It's up 9% year-to-date, up 85% on a trailing 12-month basis. So people are this obesity drugs, this GLP-1s, they're really a story that really came to the forefront last year. And now investors are just looking for ways to play it. And Eli Lilly, even though maybe they missed the initial opportunity to own the market, they kind of got it now.
Well, it also shows, too, that there is a first mover advantage, but there can also be a second, third, fourth mover advantage, too, and that basically their weight loss drug is said to be more effective. Like it causes more weight loss than Novo Nordisk, for example. On the other hand, you can take a look, is this like the new AI? You have the AI thing, NVIDIA thing, and now it's the weight loss drug thing. And if you keep topping expectations or topping each other, then that stock is going to rally. It's just the new fad, new switch, or are we really genuinely valuing these companies appropriately?
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm just looking at there's some, obviously some good numbers as typically in these big take stories and Bloomberg stories in general. Just kind of tracking the two big leaders in this GLP-1 market, the weight loss, which are really coming out of the diabetes treatment. Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk both have just had moonshots, and we've got market caps to match here. So it's interesting. My guess is once they figure out how to put this in a pill,
oh my gosh,
I could just see this thing going crazy. So again, a lot of folks are saying this will be the biggest drug category ever.
Ever, yeah.
It's just crazy to think about some of the numbers.
Lose 5 pounds, take a pill. I mean,
Exactly.
come on.
Have a wedding coming up, take a pill.
Yeah, exactly.
Balance of Power, Joe Matthew, Washington, D.C. Guess what? That starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
They've all left town again. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as lawmakers head for the hills with nothing to show for their work on the border, on Ukraine, on the budget. We'll pick up the pieces today with Jonathan Tamari from Bloomberg Government. He's with us live, along with new reporting on Donald Trump's increasing influence over Congress. We'll also get up to speed on the campaign trail with Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy. Later, the soft landing chorus growing louder. We're going to talk about it with Heather Boucher, presidential economic advisor. And we've got our signature panel here on a Friday. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us for the hour. So let's wind up the band, as always, starting with Charlie Pellet and a look at Wall Street from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the green on this Friday. Right now, the S&P higher by 8. That is a gain of just about 0.2%. Wall Street, though, grappling with another mixed economic report. Sent treasuries down. Traders are betting that the Fed will signal patience before it decides to cut rates this year. Right now, as I mentioned, the S&P up 0.2%. The Dow up 128, higher by 0.4%, and the NASDAQ Composite Index up by 13. That is a gain of 0.1%. We've got the 10-year now yielding 4.13%, with a 2-year 4.35%. Gold down $3 the ounce. Spot gold 2017 the ounce lower by 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude a retreat from yesterday's advance down 1.5%. WTI right now 76.23 a barrel. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation has reached an almost 3-year low. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Bloomberg Economics says the stage is set for the Fed to start cutting interest rates perhaps in March. Core PCE ran at 2.9% in December on a year-over-year basis. The data punctuate a year that saw inflation retreat at a much faster pace than Fed officials anticipated as low unemployment bolstered consumer spending. Footnote, spending topped Wall Street estimates last month. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Salesforce.com cutting about 700 workers, adding to a brutal string of tech layoffs at the start of this year. Salesforce up today by 1.25%. After earnings, Intel shares, they are plunging. Intel down 10.6%. Among other chip makers, Advanced Micro Devices, which reports next week, down 0.9%, and NVIDIA shares down now by 0.4%. But recapping here, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Friday rally underway. S&P holding above 4,900, 4903 on the S&P, up 8, gain there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you. Welcome to the Friday edition of Bloomberg Balance of Power. Live from Washington. Yeah, it's really Friday, the threshold of the weekend. Here we are. We've survived Iowa, New Hampshire, and now at last, a moment to breathe. Especially if you're a Washington lawmaker, they're gone. Everybody home for the weekend, early. You're working today, right? Without finishing the job on anything that we've been talking about here, beginning with a border deal. And that brings us to the Dear Colleague letter. Now, if you listen to this broadcast, you know what that means. Dear Colleague letter. Never good news. And this time from Speaker Mike Johnson. DOA reads the letter, talking about a border deal. He says that being negotiated by senators, of course, no text yet, but what he's hearing would be dead on arrival in the House if the rumored contents of that proposal were true. Also telling lawmakers in this letter, the House will hold a floor vote on impeaching the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, quote, as soon as possible, unquote. That would, of course, be one of the people sitting at the negotiating table in the border deal, which you don't think would improve the vibe in the room. So let's get started with Jonathan Tamari, covering Congress, of course, for Bloomberg Government, with us now I'm guessing you're working from home, Jonathan, because there's nobody on Capitol Hill today. Anybody talk about a working weekend to maybe chip away at any of this stuff?
Well, I think that the senators who are negotiating or trying to negotiate this border deal are probably going to be talking through the weekend. But most of the rest of Congress is basically watching and waiting to see what they come up with, what they propose, and if they can reach a deal, what the final details actually look like.
Well, just like that, just like at this time yesterday, as I'm trying to speak truth to what's going on here, based on the little that we know, Jonathan, Kyrsten Sinema hits the send button again. We're close to clinching a deal on a bipartisan border plan, she writes. We're making good progress day by day. The tweet, almost identical in timing and content to what we saw here yesterday. Is she talking to the leadership? They're just plowing ahead no matter what, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's probably talking to fellow senators and trying to keep some hope alive for this deal. You know, they're keep being each day. She's kind of basically fighting a fire where it seems like this deal is gonna go down in flames. A day ago was Mitch McConnell casting some doubt on whether it would be politically feasible to even pass the Senate. He and some other Republican senators tried to walk that back. And Sinema tweeted very similar, as you point out, yesterday. And today, Speaker Johnson kind of trying to put, you know, trying to bury the deal himself by saying it's DOA in the House, basically telling senators, don't even bother with this. It's not going to go anywhere if it comes over here. So there's a lot of forces working against this. Sinema and Senator Langford, Senator Murphy, some of the other key negotiators, they still think they can get a deal that possibly can win bipartisan support in the Senate, but there's a lot of obstacles piling up, and the longer it takes, the more that you kind of see opposition grow. That's why when you see something take this long to come together, there's a lot of hurdles that come up along the way, and it makes it that much harder to get it over the line.
Well, you know the line, time kills deals. But I don't know here, Jonathan, maybe we're witnessing something important. Maybe we're actually, if we look at this in a different way, closer to a deal. As the negotiators continue their work, everybody's negotiating in public now, it sounds like. You've got Mitch McConnell saying, hey, we got to wait for Trump. Now Mike Johnson is talking about DOA in the House. We've heard that before. Are they just trying to motivate those in the negotiating room to cut a harder deal?
I think there's some of that going on, certainly from Johnson. I think he's trying to get the most conservative border provisions possible. But I also think there's just a very real chance that it doesn't go anywhere. The House is, you know, run, the far right has significant influence in the House. They want a really conservative border deal. They don't want to help Ukraine. And they also want to use the border as a political weapon against President Biden. So there's a lot that piles up against it. And there are Democrats who might be willing to support a compromise. There's some Republicans who would be willing to support a compromise because they say, listen, this is our best chance to get conservative border policy passed in a generation, and it won't be there if Trump wins again. So there is a coalition possible, but we know that hard right exerts a lot of influence. We know Trump exerts a lot of influence in the House. That's, you know, his signature is kind of chaos, and the House has been chaos. So I think it's not just negotiating. I think there's a real risk that even a deal in the Senate won't pass the House anyway.
Well, I want to ask you about that because you're doing some great reporting on it. The phone's ringing, and it's Donald Trump on the line. If you're Mike Johnson, certainly. And you've got the story on the terminal. Trump Senate support shows he doesn't need GOP. They need him. Why would anyone think that a border deal could pass the House when he's influencing the speaker and the conference? He's not going to want Joe Biden or Democrats to get a win here. He wants to run on immigration, right?
That's right. And I mean, and that is, as we just said, one of the major hurdles. I think for somebody who wants the deal to pass, the argument is they get something in the Senate that has significant bipartisan support. And then you have the president, you have the Senate Democratic leader, the Senate Republican leader, the House Democratic leader, all supporting a deal with a big bipartisan vote behind it in the Senate. And there's one holdout faction in House Republicans, and that maybe that becomes politically untenable for them, even with Trump's influence. And they can say, hey, listen, we're trying to solve the border. And Republicans who've complained about the border for years are the ones who are blocking the solution. That is the hope that political pressure will build. But as we just said, against that is Donald Trump's influence and the idea that Republicans have that right now Biden is taking on water over the border, and they're happy to, some of them, not all, some of them are happy to leave that problem in his lap until the end of this election year.
Appreciate your being with us, Jonathan. I guess they'll be flying in then Monday evening, Tuesday morning, get back to work Tuesday afternoon. The government set to start shutting down a week from Thursday if you're playing along on your home game. Jonathan Tamari at Bloomberg Government, as we turn our attention to what's happening on the campaign trail with just top-notch reporting throughout the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary from this guy, Gregory Cordy, our colleague in the trenches of covering the campaign here at Bloomberg. It's good to see you. Nice to see you back in Washington. Everybody got out alive somehow. By the way, did you notice today it's 100 degrees warmer in Washington today than it was when we were in Iowa?
Absolutely.
Consider that.
Yes.
We're data people at Bloomberg.
Yes.
It's on to South Carolina, Gregory. This is a real different field, different contest than New Hampshire. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are on their way. Nikki Haley may already be there, but these two guys are acting like the general election has already begun. What's going to happen in South Carolina the next 4 weeks in a spot that is known for dirty pool and ugly politics?
Yeah, obviously, former President Trump and President Biden both have their own reasons for wanting to get at each other as early as possible. But there is Nikki Haley here still sticking around. And we saw out of New Hampshire a result that wasn't exactly the death blow that Trump was hoping for to get her out of the race. Not exactly the upset that she wanted to propel her. So we're kind of in limbo here where the race is kind of unsettled. Everybody is watching Haley's donors. She had a good number of prominent donors, including Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn, who says now he's not going to support this cause any longer. The worry that among the big dollar donors that they're throwing good money after bad. And yet Haley is getting more money from small dollar donors that could propel her into South Carolina. And by the way, we have a whole month until the South Carolina primary, which is almost unprecedented in the primary calendar to have that long. We're kind of skipping over Nevada.
Yes, right.
For very complicated reasons. Yes. But a lot can happen in that month. But you got to say it's a big uphill climb for Nikki Haley, but it's technically still a race.
Fascinating, and a lot of things to ask you about here. You mentioned the money trail. She's got this big donor meeting next week. Donald Trump is threatening to blacklist, if you will, donors who move in her direction. Are they moved by that when he goes on Truth Social to try to intimidate the guys with the big money?
I think in some ways it might have backfired.
Does it inspire them to donate to her?
We'll have to see who these donors are, and we're not going to get the campaign finance reports on that for some time. But for the small dollar donors, if you're an independent or a Democrat and you'd like to see anybody but Trump, that's a motivating factor to say, you can blacklist me all you want. I was never going to give you it in the first place.
Maybe it's a point of pride for somebody.
I think it might be, but and look, those small dollar donors do matter. You look at the calculus for a candidate to drop out. It's either the two main decision factors are: can I get a job in the next administration, and how do I preserve my political capital to make that happen? I think Nikki Haley's sort of made the calculation that she's not working for Trump again.
Right.
That's not a big motivator for her. But then also, sometimes you run out of money, and it's not just the TV ads. It's literally the planes and the staff and the infrastructure and the campaign headquarters. All that costs money. So far, she has the money to sustain that. Maybe it's not the big air campaign that she would like, but it's just enough to get her through South Carolina, which is her home state. It's also a very Trumpy state.
Very different than New Hampshire. What do you make of the party's effort to bring this to a close? You've got Ronna McDaniel within 24 hours of the New Hampshire primary saying it's over. Nikki Haley should get out of the race. Donald Trump's the nominee. There was apparently a conversation within the RNC to start formally calling him the presumptive nominee. You ever heard of anything like this?
No, I haven't. And it's funny how we throw around terms like presumptive nominee, and we know what it means. But there's a power to that term, obviously, and Trump would love to cloak himself in that mantle. There was this idea floated within the DNC. Can we just shortcut this and go straight to presumptive nominee?
The RNC.
Within the RNC. It would be factually incorrect. We don't call a candidate the presumptive nominee until they've reached the number of delegates to mathematically lock it in.
On the way to 1215.
That number is 1215, and until Trump gets there, and Trump might get there pretty soon.
Yeah,
by mid-March, it's mathematically possible that he's got the delegates to do that. Trump backed away from that, kind of threw a wet blanket on that last night, probably because he saw that there wasn't really the willingness within the RNC to do it anyway, and of course he doesn't want to take the loss.
Yes.
So at least for the next month or so, this thing will limp along.
Remarkable. Her strategy then is to stay home. I'm assuming she's not going to have a lot of time to travel the country and prepare for Super Tuesday, which isn't that long after South Carolina. So how does she divvy that up, knowing that nothing's more important than South Carolina right now? If she loses her home state and loses badly, that's probably the end of this thing. But she's got to perform well on Super Tuesday to be taken seriously as well.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to take one state at a time in these primary elections, which, if you think about it, is a pretty weird way of doing elections. Every state sort of takes a turn. Some states go at the same time. Yeah. New Hampshire and Iowa, because they are the first, you can kind of run simultaneous campaigns there. But really, no one's been campaigning too much in South Carolina. Ron DeSantis had an eye on it. The problem with that is if you don't make it to South Carolina, all that effort in South Carolina is wasted because you didn't pass the bar in Iowa and New Hampshire. So I don't think she's looking too far into Super Tuesday. She's got to win South Carolina first. But then Super Tuesday is an awfully big elephant to bite off in one bite. So it's really got to be a very convincing performance in South Carolina. She set at the bar all along that she just needs to improve her performance state over state. And she did. Yeah, she came in third in Iowa. She came in second in New Hampshire. Does that mean she has to come in first in South Carolina to make this a race? I don't think she's predicting that, but she at least needs to narrow that gap from 10 or 12 points to within a field goal.
Which would require a lot of work. I don't know when we get the next credible poll on New Hampshire, but she's down 30 based on the Emerson poll from earlier this month. Lastly, Gregory Cordy, we're talking about the RNC maybe circling the wagons here around Donald Trump. Is it any different the way the DNC is treating Dean Phillips?
Oh, not at all. You know, both parties' rules are designed to get a nominee quickly because it's to the party's benefit. The sooner you can pivot to the general election issues, moderate in your stances a little bit, take on the other guy, marshal your resources. If you're spending money in South Carolina, whichever Republican it is probably going to win South Carolina. You want to spend that money in North Carolina. Yes. You want to spend that money in Georgia. Right. And so the quicker you get a resolution to the nomination fight, the better. The difference between Biden is he is the president. He is the incumbent. And both parties really stack the rules in favor of the incumbent. Trump is kind of a de facto incumbent, but not the incumbent. And so there is a little bit of a question within the Republican Party of how much they want to force the issue to get Haley out of the race.
We're going to learn a lot in the next couple of weeks. We'll see if she gets to South Carolina before anything else. And Gregory Cordy will help us along the way. Great to see you. Thanks for the insights, as always, here on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington on the fastest show in politics. Our conversation ahead with President Biden's economic advisor, Heather Boushey. She'll join us live from the White House here on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We are looking at an up day on Wall Street right now for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. NASDAQ 100 index, so does remain lower. That index down now by 11 points, a decline of less than 0.1%. The S&P, though, in the green, pushing higher. Right now we have got the S&P up another 8 points. The S&P, by the way, trading above 4,900, 49.03 on the S&P 500 index, up now by about 0.2%. Dow Industrials up 120. That is a gain of 0.3%. NASDAQ up 18 points, gain there of just about 0.1%. Wall Street's grappling with another mixed economic report, sent treasuries down. Traders betting that the Fed will signal patience before it decides to cut rates this year. 10-year at 4.13%, with a 2-year now 4.35%. Gold down $3 the ounce. 2017 dropped there of just about 0.1%. Bitcoin surging 5% right now, 41,885 on Bitcoin. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil is lower today, down 1.6%. WTI traded here in New York, 76.12 a barrel. JetBlue Airways says its planned $3.8 billion merger agreement with Spirit Airlines could be terminated in coming days. JetBlue says it continues to evaluate options. JetBlue shares, they're up 2.5% right now. As for Spirit, which by the way uses the ticker SAV, we've got Spirit down now by 12.4%. Recapping stocks higher. S&P up 8, gain there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, Joe Matthew. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we thank you. Welcome to the Friday edition of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with another good round of headlines on the economy today. Just look at the terminal. This is the kind of stuff the White House was hoping for, and in many cases planning for over the past months. Fed's preferred core price gauge, PCE, cools amid robust spending. Recalling yesterday's GDP report that was off the charts. BAFO numbers here. We talked about it with Gene Sperling on Balance of Power last evening. We talk about it now with Heather Boucher, who has the ear of the president, of course, on all things economic, joining us from a sunny North Lawn. It's like 70 degrees outside today in Washington, which is quite remarkable. Member of the Council of Economic Advisors. Heather, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining. When you start to put the data together here, I don't know how you're feeling right now, but have we softly landed?
Well, I like to think of this economy as the little engine that could. It is just chugging along. It is, you can see the strength in the reports from today and yesterday. Of course, we saw that growth was 3.1% last year. And, you know, over a year ago, forecasters were predicting that 2023 would be a recession, that we would see growth of negative 0.1%. And that's not what happened. We have seen this, this strength in the U.S. economy, and alongside the ongoing strength in the labor market. And of course, all of this paired with the softening of prices, so that price increases are not going as fast. So we have a new low below 3% in the annual rate of the core PCE. But again, when you look over the last 6 months, both headline and core PCE are hovering at about 2%. So this is really good news. We're seeing this growth. We're seeing this investment. It's delivering for the American people in a way that is strong, shared, and across the country. And we're also seeing that inflation has been cooling.
Where are we going to be 6 months from now, Heather? Is it possible to answer that question based on the trajectory that we are on? Many forecasts would suggest that you might, in fact, be at that 2% target, that the soft landing will essentially be confirmed. How does your crystal ball look?
Well, I do not have a crystal ball, but here's what I can tell you. When you put all the pieces together of what we're seeing, and you pair that with the investments that the president is making all across the country, game-changing investments in infrastructure, in advancing new technologies, in advancing clean energy, what you see is an economy that is delivering now, having recovered from the pandemic, but one where we're making those game-changing investments that are going to drive productivity, growth, and jobs for years to come. And so
So, given just how strong these reports are, this all looks very good. One statistic that, really jumped out to us as we were looking at the data is that the new investment in the construction of private manufacturing facilities, something that we've been watching closely because those are the kinds of investments that the president is trying to induce through his Investing in America agenda. You are seeing that the contribution of that to growth is higher than it's been going back to 1959, so that investment continues to fan out across the country. And of course, that's leading to an uptick in construction jobs now, but that'll lead to a shift in other kinds of jobs in years to come.
I know part of your job is to bring calm and balance to the conversation, Heather Boucher, and you're awfully good at that. But as I look at this stock market, as I consider the data here, you're not a member of the political apparatus at the White House, but is it not time to start jumping up and down a little bit more to get this message across to the American people?
Well, we here at the White House are working hard every day to communicate the strength of this economy, how the president has been building an economy from the middle out. So many of my colleagues, myself, traveling the country, talking to folks like you, this has been a tough road, right? The president came into office in the middle of a pandemic recession. And then, of course, we had Putin's unprovoked war in the Ukraine that upended global energy prices. And there was a lot of uncertainty. How fast could we recover? Would supply chains renormalize? Would we see, the upending of energy prices last for a long time? And now we really see over the past year that all of those things have come back together. They've gotten under control, and the strength of the economy, the underlying strength, is really starting to shine.
We're talking with Heather Boucher live from the White House on Balance of Power today. Important news from the administration, Heather, is the president halting the approval of new licenses to export LNG, the liquefied natural gas, while it scrutinizes the impact that this would have and these shipments would have on climate change. What level of concern do you have here to potentially disrupt already fragile energy markets in Europe?
Well, this is a very important issue. Let me start by noting that the president from day one has had a whole of government approach to addressing climate change. And core to that has been making the investments we need to make to put the United States on the leading edge of investing in clean energy technologies and the capacity to produce those here in the United States and to shore up that global process there. Now, what we see in these exports is that right now the United States is the world's #1 exporter of LNG. And we know that over the next decade, that's actually predicted to double. And we've been working very closely and feel confident that we have enough to be able to assure our allies that we'll be able to continue to play this really important role. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we, like other countries, are doing what we can do to address the climate change challenges. You started this segment by noting that, it's over 70 degrees here in D.C. in the middle of January, and we are all sort of struggling with the increasing physical damages of climate change and the need to make these investments, as the president is doing, in spurring those clean energy investments.
Okay. Are you able to tell our allies how long this pause might last?
I am not able to say that now.
Weeks, not months? There's no sense of how long a review like that would take, and I'm not trying to push this too far, Heather. I don't know if there's a presumption of how long something like that might need to take.
This is being carefully considered, and conversations are ongoing.
I have to ask you as well about what's been happening in the Red Sea. This is, of course, a major issue for the administration, and we've certainly seen the Pentagon get involved here in trying to secure shipments through the Red Sea following a series of attacks from Houthi rebels in Yemen. At what point do you grow concerned about the impact on supply chain and prices?
Well, this is something we have been tracking since the beginning. We've also been, of course, looking at, how El Nino and droughts have been affecting the Panama Canal. So we, of course, in this administration have been very concerned about supply chains and global shipping. As we have looked at this, given what shippers have been doing, being able to move their transportation to other ways of getting around the world, that does take a little bit more time and it does cost a little bit more. But our assessment is that when it comes to the U.S. consumer, we do not expect to see a large price shock.
And I also just want to note that we don't expect to see anything like what we saw during the pandemic with those global supply chain challenges. That's not to underestimate this, but at this point, it looks like the effects for the consumer will be limited.
Well, that's
But
encouraging.
we will continue to monitor.
What
We will
indicators?
continue to monitor it. Yeah.
Sure, and I realize this is a fluid situation, Heather. What does the CEA look at? How does the council deal with something like this in your tracking? What indicators are you watching?
Well, we're looking at the geopolitical situation. We're looking at what kinds of goods are transported around the world and where that get to the American consumer, and what it would mean to take longer routes, and what the estimated impact would be of those costs of doing so, and how long and how much additional time that would take to get goods to the consumer.
Yeah. Well, with energy prices in mind, I'll ask you lastly if that's the wild card for you right now. We've seen crude oil pop up a bit over the past couple of weeks based on what we're watching in the Middle East, and no real disruption here, it seems, in terms of supply shock, but everyone's kind of on edge waiting for something to happen. Is that your wild card? Is that what keeps you up at night right now?
There are so many wild cards that keep me up at night, because it is literally my job to worry about these things for the president with my colleagues.
Yeah.
So certainly this is something that we are always watching closely. I mean, let me just note that this is one of the core reasons that I think that the president's investments in clean energy are so economically important. Once we can make those investments, we will be able to extricate ourselves from this very volatile global energy prices and provide consumers with more stable access, with more stable prices. For now, we continue to monitor the situation closely.
Speaking from her perch on the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, Heather Boucher, it's good to have you back on Bloomberg. We appreciate the time, as always. With us live from the White House, turning now to world and national news. For that, Nancy Lyons joins us from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Joe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is slamming today's action by the International Court of Justice that calls on Israel to take steps to prevent acts considered genocide against the Palestinians. He calls the order outrageous. International Court of Justice President Judge Joan Donoghue read the decision in open court.
The State of Israel shall take all measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip.
Donoghue also says Israel must provide humanitarian assistance to those in Gaza. The allegations of genocide brought by South Africa will continue to go through to a full hearing. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen seemed to declare victory on inflation yesterday, telling the Economic Club of Chicago prices have come down quickly while wages are rising faster. Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo says his boss has been consistent in her message.
We have seen progress made in terms of making sure that the middle class has more money to spend at the end of the month because gas prices are down $1.90. We know that there's more that we need to do in terms of trying to make sure that we put more money in the pockets of the middle class in America, and that's exactly what the President and Secretary are committed to doing.
Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo spoke with Bloomberg Surveillance. After this weekend, we'll know who will play in the NFL Super Bowl. Sunday in the NFC Championship game, it's San Francisco 49ers against the Detroit Lions. In the AFC matchup, Kansas City Chiefs against the Baltimore Ravens. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. S&P 500 index just turning negative in the past couple of minutes. We do have the Dow holding on to earlier gains, but right now we've got the S&P down 3 points, down by about 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 44, holding on to an advance of 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index in the red right now. We've got Nasdaq trading lower by 32 points, down by about 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.14% with a 2-year at 4.35%. Gold down 0.2%. 2017 a barrel for an ounce of gold. In terms of those barrels, West Texas Intermediate crude oil is trading lower as well. WTI down by 1.6%, 76.15 a barrel. Again, to be sure, we do have gold, spot gold down 0.2%, 2017 the ounce. The Fed's preferred measure of inflation reached an almost 3-year low. The data cap a year that saw inflation retreat faster than Fed officials anticipated. It had been running at a 4-decade high. Administration reaction to the numbers from Heather Boucher, a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, who was a guest on Balance of Power moments ago, right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, I like to think of this economy as the little engine that could. It is just chugging along. It is, you can see the strength in the reports from today and yesterday. Of course, we saw that growth was 3.1% last year. And, you know, over a year ago, forecasters were predicting that 2023 would be a recession, that we would see growth of negative 0.1%. And that's not what happened.
Earnings news, Intel now plunging 11.7% after last night's report. Other chip makers also lower. AMD, which reports earnings next week, AMD down 2.1%. NVIDIA, which reports in February, lower by 0.9%. Again, recapping, looking at a mixed market right now. The Dow does remain higher. S&P 500 index lower now by 3 points at 4890, down by 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, Joe Matthew, is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate the update. Charlie Pellet defying gravity and time on a daily basis with his clutch turn in the newscast. We'll have more from Washington to Wall Street with Charlie Pellet coming up a little bit later on this hour. So they all left. They're all gone. And I'll tell you what, they just picked the wrong time to do it. This is like the nicest spot to be in America right now with 70 degrees and sunny skies in Washington. We're getting ready to set up the tables for an outdoor dinner with Rick and Jeannie. As we assemble our panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are here, Bloomberg Politics contributors on a Friday. It's feeling pretty lonely around here, Rick. I don't know if you drove through town at all today, but it does strike us as strange timing for everyone to go home from Congress, that is. The House and Senate are gone with a longer list than ever to do. I don't quite understand the psychology, and maybe you do, behind going home for a long weekend when there's so much work to be done. What does Speaker Johnson have to show for his tenure here?
Yeah, I was in the city first thing this morning, Joe, and it was like a apocalypse movie. There was no traffic, there were no people, and as you point out, there's no business getting done up on Capitol Hill. And a couple things. One, we shouldn't expect too much because it's an election year, and they want to get home every single chance they can. It is a higher priority now to be home talking to your voters and trying to figure out whether or not you're going to have an election or not this year versus trying to pass legislation, which arguably is going to be extraordinarily difficult to do. And it always is an election year. But this year with, you know, a rookie speaker and a divided Congress in a way that we've never seen before, I wouldn't hold my breath to get anything, you know, important done this year.
It's hard to tell where we are on any of these issues here, Jeannie, but it's not lost on us that when lawmakers return next week, we'll be about 1 month. It's Thursday, 1 month away from the start of a government shutdown. That's going to coincide with a lot of stuff, including Super Tuesday, the State of the Union address, and of course, a lot of other issues on the campaign trail. Where's your head today? We're sitting here on a Friday with no news coming out of the White House or the Capitol. What's next week going to look like? Is it any different?
It won't be any different. Maybe it'll be a little colder in Washington, D.C. I'm jealous of you guys.
I guess
with
that's
the
fair.
70s there. But, you know, the thing is, I'm just sitting here and I am writing these campaign commercials for Democrats in my head and writing them down on paper. You have Republicans consistently talking about a crisis at the border, lambasting Democrats and Joe Biden for not doing anything about it. And yet Who doesn't want to do anything about it? The leading contender for the Republican nomination for political reasons, the Speaker of the House, who is under the thumb of that candidate. I mean, you can just go right through the list. I agree with Mitt Romney. I agree with Tom Tillis when they say what is happening is both immoral and appalling, because you have got a deal in hand if you want it truly. And the reality here is Republicans, at least the Trump wing of the party, don't want it. And that is going to win the day because, as Rick said, it is election season.
Yeah, that comment from Mitt Romney was really something. He was talking to CNN in the hallway, said it was appalling Trump would try to prevent progress on addressing the surge in migration at the southern border. This is the quote, Rick. The reality is we have a crisis at the border. The American people are suffering as a result of what's happening at the border. And it's a very important issue for Donald Trump. The fact that he would communicate to Republican senators and congresspeople that he does not want us to solve the border problem because he wants to blame Biden for it is really appalling. Is Mitt Romney the only person speaking truth here?
No, I think he may be the only one speaking it, but I think everybody understands the same thing he does, that you have, I would argue, a very slim chance of getting any kind of comprehensive reform done that will help the border in a measurable way. Right now, with all deference to Jeannie, we don't have a clue what's in that package the senators have been working on, and they've been working on for 2 years. So when is that going to come to light, and what impact is it really going to have on parole, on border crossings, on all these issues that everybody cares so much about right now? And is there any chance that that could actually pass in the Senate, where you're going to need 10 Republicans to cross the aisle to do it? And is it really probably dead on arrival in the House? So appreciate the fact that everybody's all wound up about Donald Trump. This should not surprise us, right? He has been campaigning on the border since he first started thinking about being in office prior to his presidential run in 2015. So this is nothing new. And the fact that the likelihood of getting a deal is pretty slim, I don't think it's that big a deal, but Romney is telling the truth, and everybody understands it. You're either going to try and do a college try to fix this problem, or you're going to sit on your hands and use it for politics. And this is the problem with trying to legislate in an election year. Everything is politics.
You must be having flashbacks again, Rick. I don't know, did you see the tweet, Jeannie, from Kirsten Sinema? These must be timed tweets, like when we go on the air at noon every day here. You know, when everybody's ready to throw in the towel, you get the Sinema tweet that we're close. She wrote it again today. We're close to clinching a deal between Republicans and Democrats on a bipartisan plan to secure our border. We're making good progress day by day, Jeannie. How many more days do we need?
You know, we keep hearing that. We don't know how close they are. We should tell Kristen Sinema to come on and talk to you, and she can set the record straight, in addition to her tweeting, which we love. But the reality is that if we don't know what is in this bill, and we have heard what they say is in this bill, but if we don't know, then how is it that Republicans are calling what's in the bill at this point ineffective? So my whole point is you can't have it both ways. And this is where Tillis and Romney are right. You can't, on the one hand, be screaming crisis, 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 and then be Ted Cruz blasting a bill that, by Rick's standards, he hasn't seen, and calling what is supposed to be happening ineffective. And this is not going to help the Republicans. Democrats, from an electoral perspective, are salivating at this because the Republicans are effectively taking something that is a real detriment to Joe Biden. Next to his age, it's probably the biggest thing against him. And they are allowing Democrats to use it to their advantage, all because of Donald Trump. So you can't take Donald Trump out of this equation. It would be a different scenario if he wasn't the leading contender on the Republican side.
Rick, I've got less than a minute. Is this the best chance we're going to get? Langford, Sinema, Murphy at the table?
Well, I think it's the only chance you're going to get for this year. Otherwise, if this doesn't happen next week, then I think you're turning the page till post-election. Look, anybody who thought this wasn't going to be about Iowa, New Hampshire, and Trump's emergence as the nominee was crazy. Should have been done last year.
And if you were listening or watching this program, you heard it all, saw it all coming. Thanks to Rick and Jeannie and their great analysis. They're back with more after this. Kaylee Lyons will join the conversation ahead. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks now lower across the board. Intel helping drive stocks lower. We've got Intel now down by 12.1%. This after last night's earnings report. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger was on Bloomberg Radio addressing the stock market's response.
So we think the market reaction is a bit overstated in that respect. We understand it, but our company, our employees are doing an incredible job at delivering our process technology, restoring product leadership, defining new categories like the AI PC. We're on a multi-year journey, and we're not going to be judged on a 90-day shot clock. We are out to rebuild this company, and we had a great 23, and I'm confident in a great 24 for this company.
And again, Intel shares right now, they are trading lower by 12%. JetBlue Airways says its planned $3.8 billion merger agreement with Spirit Airlines could be terminated in coming days. JetBlue up 2.1% on that news. Spirit trading lower by 12.7%. JetBlue has notified Spirit that terms of the deal, quote, may not be satisfied by the dates in the agreement, meaning it could be called off on or after January 28th. American Express shares surging now by 6.1%, the most in a year after the credit card giant forecast earnings for 2024 that topped analyst estimates and said it would stick to its long-term profit and revenue growth. Again, AXP American Express up by 6.5%. After earnings, we've got Visa shares trading lower. Visa now down by 1.7%, down $4.67 a share to $267.95. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
He stormed out. That's the headline as we wait for a verdict in the E. Jean Carroll trial. Donald Trump today storming out of the courtroom after only a couple of moments. Kaylee Lyons with me now in Washington, D.C. Kaylee, this type of behavior that we've been seeing from the former president, I guess, is consistent, but we could actually get some real news here in the next couple of hours.
Yeah, closing arguments are taking place right now. Then the jury will go to deliberate. Of course, what they're deliberating is really just the monetary penalty that the former president owes to E. Jean Carroll, as he already has been found liable for rape and defamation. It's now just a question of what kind of dollar figure comes with that at the end of the day.
Incredible stuff with his lawyer, Alina Habba, being threatened with prison today based on her behavior as well. We reassemble our panel for their take on what's happening here in Donald Trump's legal world. It's quite remarkable. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie, the president, former president, has so far turned this into a moneymaker. Is it going to feel the same once a penalty comes down? Is he going to raise money on this like he has all the rest?
Oh, I think he will try. You know, as Kaylee was just mentioning, you know, they have already found him guilty of the assault portion of this. This is all about monetary damages. And here is somebody who keeps talking about how much he is worth. And of course, the other side is talking about how much this has cost E. Jean Carroll. So he could have a big penalty, which he will then turn around and try to fundraise off of. And if history is any guide, he will make a good bit of money doing that. That said, you could just see the frustration on his face and hear it in his voice every time he thinks about this E. Jean Carroll case. He cannot stop talking about it on Truth Social.
I was going to say there is a litany of Truth Social posts. Yeah, I mean, using a lot of the language we've heard from the former president before: witch hunt against a political opponent, court stacked against me. And this post in particular I'm looking at with Make America Great Again. And of course, this is just a civil case, Rick, let alone all of the other criminal charges he's facing, 91 felony counts he's been indicted on. Which one of them, if any, actually matters to his electorate?
Well, I think they all matter. Probably not to his base, the MAGA base. They've already proven they'll stick with him through thick and thin. But, you know, when you look at what is going on in this trial, and even the comments from the judge, a credible voice in this, you know, that echoes comments that Trump himself made on Access Hollywood toward the end of the 2016 election. It's shocking stuff. You can't actually put it into a TV commercial because it's explicit. I mean, you know, I've never seen anything like that. And if you told me that that somehow is going to help you with swing voters and moderates, you know, and women in suburbs, you know, I'd fall over my chair. I mean, this is harmful to his ability to reach across swing districts, swing voters, and talk to them about anything. This is a block to a conversation. And if the Democrats were smart, they'd have a group put this stuff on the air and make sure everybody's hearing what those who are following this court case are hearing, because, you know, it falls into the category of you can't make it up.
Well, that's right. In our last minute then, Jeannie, how does the Biden campaign, or how should the Biden campaign handle this gift that's been dropped in its lap?
I think for now, they just let it play out. He is all over the news on this. Let that play out. But I think long term, they are going to be using this, as Rick just talked about, to remind moderates and independents in those 7 key swing states. This is what you're voting to put back in the White House, this chaos in our lives, if you vote for Trump. And they feel like in a close election, it may be enough to see them through.
Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, they're back next hour with more analysis here on a Friday. Great to have both of you with us, Kaylee. This conversation will develop a bit later on today when we put a dollar figure on it.
Absolutely. And of course, there's other things to consider here. We're still awaiting the appeals court's decision on whether or not Trump, as he claims, does indeed have immunity from prosecution as a former president.
Just spell the name right, I guess, is the strategy right now, because he's in the news every day. Hour 2 starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
This is what Ukraine will look like when the money runs out. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, as the Biden administration sounds the alarm on funding for Ukraine, which of course has been tied to a so far elusive deal on the border. Kaylee, they're all gone. It's just us left here in the nation's capital, despite a very long to-do list.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They frequently take long weekends.
Well,
Congress, of course, I'm speaking about, but doing so when there are so many live issues at the moment, a border Ukraine deal, they still have to figure out how they're going to fund the government beyond March.
Yep.
And there's just many questions as to what this Congress, if anything, is going to be able to accomplish.
And so the Biden administration is trying to get something moving here. You remember the dour feeling remarks from Mitch McConnell yesterday on a border deal and Ukraine. They're trying not to let this slip through their fingers. And we wanted to talk to Melinda Herring at the Atlantic Council, who's been in Kyiv for a good chunk of the last 2 years, to talk about what really would happen. Kaylee, you remember the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan gave Speaker Johnson a detailed classified briefing on what Ukraine would look like after it lost funding from the United States, and we're told it was a horror show.
Well, and the question remains, even if they could get funding in this go-around, given how difficult this has proven to be, is this potentially going to be the last one? We're coming up here, Joe, on the 2-year anniversary of this war, and there is no end date in sight, but maybe there is an end date for the U.S.'s monetary and military support for Ukraine.
It's kind of amazing to think. Melinda Herring, who knows, will help us stare down the barrel of this potential reality straight ahead. We're going to start, as always, though, with a look at Wall Street. Charlie Pellet joins us from New York with that. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. I thank you very much. And yes, got to begin with a headline right off the Bloomberg Professional Service. That is a new job for Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts. A Chicago investment firm with ties to Barack Obama has hired former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick from Bain Capital. This, according to a person familiar with the matter. Patrick is joining Vistria Group, an $11 billion impact investment firm. So again, new job for Deval Patrick, joining a Chicago private equity firm. We've got stocks trading mixed right now. The Dow had been negative just a couple of minutes ago, back in the green right now. Little changed, up 24 points, up less than 0.1%. The S&P 500 index down 7, was trading above 4,900. Right now the S&P at 48.86. 36, down by about 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 60 on this Friday right now, drop there of 0.4%. Wall Street is grappling with mixed economic data. That is keeping treasuries under pressure. 10-year yield 4.14%, the 2-year 4.35%. Gold lower little change, 2016 the ounce. It is down now by about $4, down 0.2%. Bitcoin up 5.1%, 41,939 on Bitcoin, and crude lower by 0.8%, 76.76 a barrel. Briefly, Intel lower after delivering a disappointing forecast last night. Intel now down by 11.9% among other chip makers. AMD right now trading lower by 2.1%. AMD reports earnings next week, and Nvidia down now by 0.9%. Recapping, we're looking at a mixed market right now. Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by 28 points, up 0.1%. S&P lower by 7, down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, Joe and Kaylee. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Joe, I'm sure you saw earlier today the Dear Colleague letter from the Speaker of the House.
You know my deal with Dear Colleague letters.
Mike Johnson.
Never good news.
Dear Colleague, comma.
Yeah.
Goes on to say, if rumors of the draft proposal are true, and this is alluding to the deal that Senate negotiators are working on with the White House to try to secure an agreement that ties Ukraine funding to border security, it would have been dead on arrival in the House anyway.
There's
That's
no
according
text
to the
yet.
Speaker.
How does he know?
Rumors. If the rumors are true,
All right.
it would be dead on arrival in the House. So how do you get Ukraine funding through the House when so many members don't seem to want it, if you're not going to do it in a border deal?
It's a problem.
It is, especially perhaps for Ukraine, as it is continuing to fight a war
100%.
against Russia.
Yeah. This is the great fear of the administration. By the way, we're right about the time they're supposed to be running out of money, correct? Wasn't that supposed to be January into February?
Right.
With the last cash from America.
Yes, with the 2-year anniversary of the war quickly approaching next month. So let's turn now to Nick Wadhams, who covers U.S. national security for us here at Bloomberg, and of course has been laser focused over the last 2 years of this conflict on what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. Nick, do we actually have an understanding of what the U.S. is able to provide if this supplemental funding doesn't come through, or is it cold turkey cut off?
Well, I mean, that's the big question, whether an agency like the Pentagon that gets $850 billion a year can find a little loose change between the couch cushions. But right now they are saying unequivocally no. I mean, we had a Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting a few days ago where Secretary Austin was there with about 50 other defense ministers from around the world, and he urged other countries to, quote unquote, dig deep to help Ukraine. But this was basically the first and I think it was the 18th or the 19th meeting of this group where the U.S. had nothing to offer. I mean, they are absolutely frozen in place right now, and there is really no prospect for that to come unbudged anytime soon, absent action from Congress.
What do our European allies think of this idea? Because we've clearly been leading the charge on this.
Well, I mean, you've had the UK come around with what it says is, it's trying to help more, so adding, I think, another $2.5 billion to the fight. But, I mean, when you're looking what Joe Biden is asking for, I mean, $60 billion for this year. I mean, it's just the magnitude is just completely different. So, what we're starting to see, interestingly, is a focus in Ukraine to shifting much more to defense. So there's really no expectation right now that Ukraine would be able to have the capacity to take back any more of the land that Russia seized during the invasion. And the result is I think what they're really trying to do is hunker down and just try to withstand the Russian assault.
So then it becomes a question, Nick, of even if this aid comes through, whether or not Ukraine can actually win this war in perhaps the way they'd want to, in recuperating all of that land, getting it out once again of Russia's hands. So what's the end game? Is the end game changing the longer this goes on?
That is very much a live debate within the administration, because there is a broad recognition, I think, within the administration that Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was right when he said last year, listen, we are headed towards stalemate. Russia, it's unlikely they're going to be able to take a lot more land, but it's very unlikely that Ukraine is going to be able to pry them loose from that land. That was even when the U.S. was contributing a ton of money. I think what you're seeing is is a broad recognition that this thing, yes, we are not going to see a significant change in the lines in 2024. Who knows what 2025 will bring, but there needs to be at least some sort of discussion about what an end game looks like. So far, it's really not much more further along in terms of their thinking than that.
Lastly, Nick, your team is up with a story that Vladimir Putin is sending signals that he might be ready to sit down and have peace talks. Is that emboldened by the idea of money running out? Does that strengthen his hand?
I think there are a few things going on there. So it's very unclear why Putin would be sending these signals. We know he is sending the signals that, hey, I'm ready to play ball here, but there are a lot of reasons that could be. One is he may want an out. Another is he's looking to take advantage or perhaps insert himself in the conversations in Congress, because you could have some people say, hey, look, Vladimir Putin wants a way out. We don't need to send Ukraine more money. The other issue is Putin himself has an election coming up. He needs to shore up popularity within Russia, and the idea that he's looking for peace, looking for an end to this conflict plays very well. So, but to be honest, one of the least likely ideas is that he's actually willing to make any major concessions. I don't think you're going to see that anytime soon.
Thanks for being here, as
My
always.
pleasure.
Nick Bottoms, he's one of the best here. His whole team is, our national security team, has had quite a time covering this, Kaylee.
Yep.
And great information that you can find on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com. As we add the voice of Melinda Herring, we very specifically called Melinda to talk today about this because she actually has a very good sense of what this means. Of course, with the Atlantic Council, she's spent more time in Kyiv than just about anyone you're going to hear from on this program since the start of the war. Melinda, it's great to see you. What is the White House telling Republican leadership behind closed doors in these briefings with Jake Sullivan about what will happen to Ukraine when the money runs out? Let's look out, say, 3 to 6 months. What would be the chain reaction that followed the end of the money trail?
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me back. So the White House is telling Republicans, get real, that the situation in Ukraine is not just going to stay in Ukraine, that it has real security implications for Europe and for the United States. And they are showing classified information, and they're talking about what happens if the $61 billion does not go through. So make no mistake about it, there is no short-term alternative. If this money doesn't come through, it's going to make it even more difficult on the front lines. We already see soldiers are rationing shells. There's not enough 155 millimeter shells. Europe is not going to meet the 1 million shells that they promised this year. Well, the North Koreans have already delivered those to Moscow. So it's really a dire situation. We also see Ukrainian commanders saying we can't do the kinds of operations we want because we don't have the kit that we need now. And this is only a couple months after the U.S. Has run out of funds.
So if we could just elaborate on that Europe point, Melinda, because obviously the U.S. is not the only ally that's in the game here that has been providing the support. Europe has as well. I think even a greater chunk of their share of GDP has been spent relative to the U.S. Are they too starting to pull back?
No, actually the opposite is happening. So the Europeans are starting to wake up. Scholz in Germany has said it's time to start doing more. But it's not clear how far they're going to go. So Scholz has a conference the first week of February. He's bringing everyone together in Europe, and he's saying, this situation is serious. We have to get real. And he's going to point fingers. And he's likely going to point fingers at France, Italy, and Spain, who have not done enough when you look at the figures. But just to zoom back out for a minute, there's different categories of aid. And the U.S. is the biggest donor of military aid. Europe has done a lot, but they've been more active on the humanitarian and economic assistance front. That's why this is such a big deal.
So how do the dominoes fall here if American money comes to an end, Melinda? Is this, as Nick mentioned, Mark Milley's vision of a stalemate, a war of attrition that essentially grinds Ukraine down to nothing? Or is Vladimir Putin emboldened to the extent that a NATO country could be involved, Poland or one of Poland's neighbors, and we have a major problem that entangles the U.S.?
Joe, I'm going to quote my friend, General Philip Breedlove, who ran NATO, and he just gave a wonderful briefing, and he said, everything depends on us. and on the choices that our leaders make now. There's different scenarios that we could run through, but if Ukraine does not get the weapons it needs to defend itself, it will lose eventually. Ukrainians are not going to give up, even if the $61 billion does not come. But more Ukrainians are going to die. When I go to Kiev and talk to them about these sort of dire scenarios, they tell me we will fight with forks, we will fight with AK-47s. We've lost too much. We know what Russian occupation is, and we're not going to live that way. So it's going to get much messier and more people are going to die. I think the concern, though, is that if Putin is able to take a big chunk of Ukraine, through attrition and through our bad policy choices, and again, if we do not provide this assistance, Ukraine is going to lose, and it is going to be our fault, and it is going to threaten Western security for the next 50 years. Could NATO get drawn in? Absolutely. Putin's plan is to reconstitute his forces, and he may go after a NATO member next. Does that automatically pull the U.S. in? It does not automatically pull it in, but under the Article 5 guarantee, if a NATO member were hit, they would have to have a discussion, and they would likely defend that territory. So it would involve the United States.
So then let's talk about Russia's capacity specifically. As you talk about how Ukraine's capacity, their munitions are waning. They're obviously losing a great deal of Ukrainian soldiers. What about Russia? Do they really have the resources to continue the fight this long?
So far they do. So they just got 1 million shells from North Korea, and they are getting more rockets and drones from Iran as well. The Russian side has good, talented financial managers, and they have been able to make things, to keep the economy afloat and to keep things going in spite of losing a lot of very talented folks. So, it's a question of how long can they hold out? But that's actually the wrong question. I think in Putin's mind, he's wondering if he thinks he can hold out longer than the West can. And that's we're in a pivotal point right now with the U.S. election.
What happens to our reputation internationally, our allies or beyond, Melinda, if this goes down the way it appears it might? No border deal, no money for Ukraine, and they're left alone.
Joe, that's the money question. I think it means that America's not much of a superpower anymore, that we don't keep our promises. I mean, even in the language of Joe Biden, we've seen him change from we will be there as long as it takes to we'll be there as long as we can. And that is not a mistake in rhetoric. The sands are changing politically right now, but that's not where the American people are. If you look at where the American people are, they overwhelmingly support Ukraine, and they don't like bullies. They view Vladimir Putin as a bully. So I think it's time for Americans to pick up their phones and call their congressmen and call the White House and demand that we keep standing with the people of Ukraine until they are able to push the Russians back.
Well, as we talk about Vladimir Putin, and we were just discussing this with our own Nick Wadhams, this idea that he's starting to signal that perhaps he would be open to conversations about how to bring this to an end. Can he be viewed as a trustworthy actor in any conversation?
No, he cannot. And honestly, we've seen this movie many times before. So if you look at Putin's narratives, the Institute for the Study of War has looked at when does Vladimir Putin talk about negotiations? And the answer to this is he talks about negotiations when the West has to make a hard decision about weapons, or when the West has to make a hard decision. He's trying to distract us. He is not interested in negotiations whatsoever. Look at Dmitry Medvedev's rhetoric 2 days ago. He says that he's going to use nuclear weapons. He's talked about over and over again about how Ukrainians are not real people. They reject Ukrainian territorial claims. The Russians are not serious about negotiations, and they're trying to keep the United States from passing this assistance bill. That's all it is.
I'm out of time here, Melinda, and I hate having to cut anyone off. I just have to mention quickly Russia now accusing Ukraine of shooting down a large military plane, a cargo-style plane that was carrying 65 Ukrainian prisoners for an exchange. You don't believe this report? Why would Ukraine do something like that?
Joe, I think we're still waiting for the investigation. I don't think we know enough, and I'm not willing to put my faith on the Russian side of the story. So on that one, I would ask your viewers, let's wait and see until the investigation comes out.
Well, your restraint is always well received here. Melinda Herring from the Atlantic Council, we thank you as always for the insights. It was an IL-76 aircraft, like a big cargo plane that went down, Kaylee. A terrible story emerging here from Russia. More straight ahead. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We're looking at a mixed market right now. We've got the Dow higher, S&P, NASDAQ. They are both trading lower right now. However, we are on track for a winning week for the U.S. equity market. It would be 3 in a row. S&P right now on the week up by 1%. Here's where we stand in the red on the S&P 500 index, down 6 points right now. That is a drop for the S&P of just about 1/10%. The Dow, though, heading in the other direction, higher by 1/10%. The Dow up now by 34 points. points. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 58, a drop there of 0.4%. Wall Street today grappling with mixed economic data, keeping treasuries under pressure. Traders are betting that the Fed will signal patience before it decides to cut rates this year. Of course, there is a Fed decision next week and a J-Powell news conference. Yes, count on Bloomberg for the first word. You can hear it live on Bloomberg Radio and television. 10-year yield, 4.15%. The 2-year, 4.35%. Gold down $4 the ounce right now, $20.16 the ounce. That is a drop of 0.2%. Crude up 0.1%, $77.44 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin now surging 5%. 41,919 today on Bitcoin. JetBlue Airways says its planned $3.8 billion merger agreement with Spirit Airlines could be terminated in coming days. We've got JetBlue advancing now by 2.9%. Spirit shares, they are down by 8.7%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed. S&P down 4, a drop right now of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Kaylee and Joe, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at where we are about 4 hours into the trading session. Meanwhile, Joe, we're only 2 states in to the Republican primary
You
race.
noticed that.
Just 2.
A lot of people think it's over.
48 states still have not voted on anything or anyone, and yet apparently the RNC was considering adopting a resolution to declare Donald Trump the party's presumptive nominee after 2 states, Iowa and New Hampshire.
Which I guess shouldn't be a shock after Ronna McDaniel went on TV to urge Nikki Haley to drop out of the race the day after New Hampshire, saying that she didn't see a map, a path for her on the map. And you've got Mitch McConnell calling him the nominee behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. What's going on around here?
Well, Donald Trump actually has an opinion about it. He posted on True Social last night, I feel for the sake of party unity that they should not go forward with this plan, but that I should do it the old-fashioned way and finish the process off at the ballot box.
Well, if anyone likes to do it the old-fashioned way, it's Donald Trump. He earned it.
Well.
Sorry, that was an old commercial. Should we bring in the panel?
Yes, we should.
Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano join Bloomberg Politics contributors. You know what I'm talking about, right, Jeannie? The old-fashioned way. Are you surprised Donald Trump doesn't want to just shut it down now? Who's talking to him?
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating because, yes, I do remember that commercial, by the way, Joe Matthew, but it is so fascinating because you're looking at this thing and you're saying this guy won, to Kaylee's point, 230,000 votes in 2 very small non-representative states. We have until late July for the convention to start. And you have Ronna McDaniel and the RNC pushing to declare him the winner and him swooping back in on Truth Social and saying, hey, guys, I will do it the old-fashioned way, as you say. You know, the odd thing is I'm struggling to figure out how the party could benefit from this, save a few $1 million. I don't know. But strategically, it doesn't make sense. And of course, this is sort of, I think, party members trying to bow to the feet of Donald Trump and saying, you are the presumptive nominee. Forget about the delegates, that 12, 15 or whatever it is you need to win. We will just make you the presumptive nominee right now.
But Rick, isn't he the presumptive nominee? I mean, it's one thing to officially declare it in this very littler sense for the RNC, but this was the conversation we were all having on Tuesday night after New Hampshire. He won. Nikki Haley lost by 11 points. Very difficult to see her path forward, how she has any credible path to the nomination. And doesn't that get us to presumptive?
Yeah, I mean, presumptive is actually a technical term. You know, it means that you've assembled the 1,215 votes that you need to win a convention. And so there are those like me who think until you've crossed that threshold, you can't be called a presumptive nominee. You can be called the guy who's going to win. You can be called the guy who's crushing the opposition. You can be called a lot of things, but you can't be called presumptive nominee. And there are some technical reasons, too. When you start looking at sort of joint fundraising committees with the RNC, there are things you can do before you're the presumptive nominee, and there are things that get charged against your cap once you're the presumptive nominee for the general election. So my guess is the Trump campaign, which is being run very professionally, looked at these things and said, why in the world do we need that moniker that'll just put pressure on our fundraising operation? And then there's the practical political reason. The last thing you want to tell voters 3 weeks before a primary in South Carolina is, guys, I got this. It's over. Don't worry about turning out. I'm the presumptive nominee. So there's a real reason why the guys down in Mar-a-Lago are going, no, we're not there yet. So until Nikki Haley is dispatched, nobody wants to call him that.
That's pretty good. Jeannie, it is entirely possible, as we discussed earlier on the broadcast, that he gets that number. He gets more than halfway to 12-15 around Super Tuesday. But if we're already calling for restraint here, why was he calling on Nikki Haley to drop out of the race the other night? He was essentially calling himself the nominee, wasn't he?
He was, but he was angry about the things that Nikki Haley said about him, and he, obviously wants to wrap this thing up as quickly as possible because he's got to be in court and fight these court battles. But the reality is, if she does get out, that's not necessarily a good thing for Donald Trump either, because people voting in primaries, for him, in his best case scenario, is a way to increase turnout in the general election. We know that if you vote in the primary for somebody, you're more likely to get out in the general. In an election this tight, the last thing he should want, if he's looking at these voting numbers in these tight states, is to wrap this thing up so early that people feel there's not much of a race and they don't get out. So, it doesn't make a lot of practical legal sense for them to do this at this point. And yet this has been the trajectory of Ronna McDaniel. And if we look at the 2022 election, this is a person who simply is not able to appeal beyond his base. And so they face that danger once again. We're talking about Republicans and he's appealing, but in the general, he is going to face an uphill battle. He needs the turnout to be broad. And that's why this can be a mistake. And they know that when they look at these numbers.
Well, and Rick, doesn't he also need the votes of people who otherwise would have voted for Nikki Haley? How should he be approaching her as an opponent here when she's now starting to call him out on what she said was a temper tantrum on that evening in New Hampshire?
Yeah, there's no question. They'd much rather be talking about Joe Biden than Nikki Haley. And he wants to move toward consolidating all those voters, right? Look at how quickly they moved to get Ron DeSantis and his small band of merry voters back into the fold with Donald Trump. And they want to do the same thing with Nikki Haley. He's all about consolidation. He doesn't want to look weak within his own party. These are very important symbols of his power, is that nobody disputes him as the otherwise leader of the Republican Party. But he wants to go against Biden. I mean, he is aching for that rematch. And he's like the aging boxer, I'm going to get my title back. I'm going to go back in the ring with this guy. And yet he's distracted. He's distracted by Nikki Haley. He's distracted by these court cases, neither of which have him talking about Biden. And so by the time he gets around to, the end of the day, he hasn't really spent much time putting any lead on the target with Biden. And that's a real problem for him because Biden is not slowing down. He is taken this campaign to Donald Trump. He doesn't have a legitimate primary contender. And he has the advantage right now if he'll take it. Up until this point in time, the Biden campaign's been pretty quiet, but I see that they might be starting to emerge in more of a contrast with Trump.
How do you feel about that, Jeannie? Because they're both heading for South Carolina this weekend. Obviously, Nikki Haley is already there, but Joe Biden's acting like this is the general election right now.
They are. I mean, they have revamped the team and they have put some old stalwarts back into the campaign fold. He did very, very well in New Hampshire, not being on the ballot. He did better than Barack Obama did in 2012. And here he is. He's got people talking about a very good economy, good numbers right now, infrastructure, abortion anniversary, gun control. These are the things he wants to be talking about. So they are feeling good. And let's not forget the endorsement by the United Auto Workers, another feather in his cap, particularly as you look in the Midwest. So they are feeling pretty good this week, and probably why Trump wants to consolidate his vote. But you can't do that by trying to kick out somebody, particularly if you are the chair of the Republican National Committee and you are the chair of that party.
Just on President Biden, Jeannie, we're about to discuss in our next segment the fact that the Biden administration has now put a halt on new licenses for LNG exports, something that obviously has ramifications for energy markets, potentially the American economy overall. Should we be looking at this as anything other than trying to pacify environmentalists in the left who he's hoping turn out for him in November?
Well, I think that is an important constituency of his, but I think it also reflects what the Biden administration has been trying to do for some time. They obviously are working, number one, towards a strong economy, but they recognize the fact that the environment matters enormously to all of our futures, and they have long said that you can do both. You can have a healthy environment and a healthy economy, and they are trying to lead the way on that with some of these new investments. So I do think it is in keeping with what they have been trying to do during a very difficult time as they move us out of this pandemic.
We talked to Heather Boucher earlier in the broadcast about this, Kaylee, and she seemed to indicate that the administration is not terribly worried about what happens to energy markets, natural gas markets in Europe specifically, that we have enough to bridge the gap for now, but this could become a much bigger deal the longer it takes.
Yeah,
we'll talk more about that ahead, as you mentioned. Rick Davis, Judy Shanzano, many thanks, as always, for the conversation, our signature panel here on Bloomberg's Balance of Power. We turn now to Nancy Lyons to bring us up to date on world and national news from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Joe. Well, his testimony yesterday lasted about 3 minutes. Today, Donald Trump got up and left the courtroom shortly after closing statements began in the defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll. He walked out just as Carroll's attorney was telling the jury the former president continues to defame her client. He then returned about 45 minutes later when Carroll's attorney had finished. Trump has already been found liable for sexual assault and defamation against Carroll. This trial is meant to determine what damages Carroll should receive, if any. The International Court of Justice is demanding Israel take steps to prevent acts that some see as genocide against Palestinians, but they stop short of ordering an immediate ceasefire. The preliminary ruling was not well received by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected.
Netanyahu says it's Hamas that's a genocidal terror organization. The court will continue its review of the case accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. The NFL's Championship Sunday is coming up this weekend. The Kansas City Chiefs will first take on the Ravens in the AFC Championship. In the NFC Championship, the Detroit Lions will travel to the West Coast to take on San Francisco 49ers. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Connection lost.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We're looking at a mixed market right now with the Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by 25 points. That is a gain of just about 0.1%. The S&P lower by 6 now, down 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down 53, drop there of 0.3%. The S&P, however, is on track for another winning week. 10-year yield, 4.15%. We do have the 2-year yielding, 4.35%. Spot gold down $2.50 the ounce to $20.17. That is a decline today for gold of just about 0.1%. While West Texas Intermediate crude up 1%, $78.09 a barrel. Bitcoin trading higher by 5.6%. Bitcoin 42,000 now, 136 on Bitcoin. Wall Street today is grappling with mixed economic data, keeping treasuries under pressure. Traders are betting the Federal Reserve will signal patience before it decides to cut rates this year. Of course, we got the Fed meeting next week. Complete coverage on Bloomberg Radio and television. Intel shares plunging today, down 12.3% after delivering a disappointing forecast, renewing doubts about a long-promised turnaround of the once dominant chip maker. Again, Intel down 12.1%. Other chip makers lower as well. AMD, which reports next week, down 1.7%. NVIDIA, which reports in February, trading lower by 1.1%. Recapping, mixed market right now, little changed on the Dow, up just 3 points, while the S&P lower by 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, Joe and Kaylee. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yes, sir. We thank you, Charlie Pellet, as always, and great to have you with us here on the fastest show in politics. Welcome, if you're just joining us, to our audiences on the radio, on the satellite, on YouTube, and on Bloomberg TV. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, we drive forward here with big news from the Biden administration. We talked about it earlier with Heather Boushey at the White House. The Biden administration freezing licenses to export liquefied natural gas. And we're going to dig into this with breaking news that we should mention first here, Kaylee. We're waiting for damages in Donald Trump's defamation trial. You might hear people talking about a verdict. This is, of course, he's already been found liable in this case, and we're waiting for a number. The jury just beginning deliberations after closing arguments ended. And we'll keep you posted here, of course, on Bloomberg as soon as we learn something. Kaylee, this story about LNG is something that really gets to the heart of the Biden administration's approach to climate.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, this is a president who has tried to be a climate president, considering environmentalist policies in most of the decisions that he's making, but facing a great deal of pressure from the environmentalist wing, if you will. Yeah. To do more. And when you think about LNG, it's seen as a way to wean coal-dependent countries off of coal, which is more damaging in terms of the emissions, but it still potentially could result in methane leaks, things like that. And that is what the Energy Department is now going to consider, and why, for the time being, they're halting approval of these licenses.
This story coming from Jen DeLuey in our Washington Bureau, Bloomberg Energy and Environmental Policy reporter. Jen, it's good to see you. You've been awfully busy here. Give us a sense of the impact that this will have, the duration. Do we have any idea how long this review will last?
That is the big question right now. How long is this going to last? At this point, we can really only say that it'll be at least several months, and it's almost certainly going to take us past the November election, this uncertainty, this study. But what's at stake here is future approvals, proposals to export from facilities that wouldn't come online for years and years. The U.S. is already the world's largest LNG exporter, and that's just with 7 export terminals today. Existing approvals already exist for another 8 or so projects that could double U.S. LNG exports in the meantime. So what we're really talking about is a pause that will affect the next tranche of projects that would come under construction in the next few years.
Yeah, I was reading some research from our analysts at Bloomberg Intelligence, and they essentially think this is really going to be an impact felt 2028 and beyond, because these are long-term projects we're talking about. And that really is the concern of the climate movement, because if you're making these long-term investments in this kind of infrastructure, you're essentially saying you are going to be dependent on this form of energy for a long time into the future. And they would like to see a green transition. That's essentially what this is about, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the concern is that once you build it, you will want to use it, and not just for a few years, that you're going to want to get a return on the investment here, that you're going to want to use this infrastructure for decades into the future, when we need to be well past gas, according to many estimates and clearly the science. The concern of an environmentalist really was resonating at the White House. I mean, young activists were about to stage a protest at the Energy Department over this very issue. This morning they canceled it, said they got what they wanted.
Tough timing here, considering what's happening in Ukraine. what could this mean for our allies in Europe who are dealing with an already fragile energy market?
Right, we're hearing a lot about that today. Obviously, there's a great deal of concern about the extent to which Europe can rely on non-Russian supplies of gas. If you remember back a couple years ago, after the invasion, the U.S. Said it would help Europe increase its supply of natural gas from non-Russian partners,
Yes.
about 50 BCM a day. We've well surpassed that. And Europe is in a good place in terms of what's in storage now heading into the end of winter. There is a concern about, what happens down the road the next few years. But environmentalists and opponents of LNG would say those fears have largely been sated, their needs have largely been sated, and we can now turn toward emission-free sources and focus there.
Well, and this potentially could create a massive opportunity for Qatar, which is also a huge exporter of liquefied natural gas. Of course, Congress has been very quick to seize on this news today. You had House Speaker Mike Johnson calling this outrageous, but even on the Democratic side, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia who chairs the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, said, and this is part of a statement, if this pause is just another political ploy to pander to the keep-it-in-the-ground climate activists at the expense of American workers, businesses, and our allies' needs, I will do everything in my power to end this pause immediately. Does Congress have that authority, or can the Energy Department just say, this is the policy, deal with it?
There's an open question how much this might get litigated, and we'll see that obviously play out potentially in the courts. But there are lawmakers who are telling us that they feel like they can pursue this legislatively, that they can seek to get a rider in, say, a spending bill agreement or, a deal on immigration, that they can end it legislatively that way. We'll see. Obviously, Manchin is going to devote a lot of attention to this. There are a lot of Republicans and even some other moderate Democrats who are going to be coming out swinging.
Boy, leave it to Joe Manchin to always have something nice for Uncle Joe. And that may well end up being the case here. I'll be curious to see where we move forward. The concern then, in terms of global supplies, is not founded, it sounds like, or U.S. supplies. This is a well-timed project from your view?
It is as good a time as last year. There's a lot of question about why didn't you do the pause last year? Why didn't you do this study last year when there weren't a lot of approvals flowing?
Is there an answer to that?
We haven't gotten one yet. The last time a study like this was conducted was in 2018. There was no pause at that point. They did the study as they continued to do permits.
So that is possible to do them simultaneously.
Absolutely. We have precedent from 2018 as well as 2015. The first time, by the way, that there was a big study on this was in 2012 under Obama, right before an election.
Fascinating. And it's interesting to hear what you're hearing from these officials is that essentially they're saying things have evolved and we have to recalculate. This hasn't been done in the last 5 years. In the meantime, of course, in the background is, as I was mentioning, the president's broader push to he has a lot of clean energy goals, whether it be from electric vehicles or otherwise. Is there a sense that the administration is moving forward enough on some of these other cleaner sources of energy to offset potentially the need in the future for LNG or whatever it is in terms of fossil fuels?
Up until this point, the administration has really focused on that side of the equation, on stoking demand for emission-free power for electric vehicles. Obviously, that's largely what the Inflation Reduction Act's programs were all about. They are moving, of course, with regulations that will work on the supply side. But the concern here is really about the supply. I mean, the folks who were most concerned about this, who were bringing this to the administration, are the same people who were really angry and dispirited after the administration's decision to approve the Willow project, the ConocoPhillips oil project in Alaska last year. The concern is, again, just about decades of more oil and more gas supply, even if you're able to change the demand for the emission-free options.
Yeah.
Have progressives been pushing for this on the Hill? Is that how he got here? Or is this a campaign-minded decision?
Certainly the cry from Manchin and others on the Hill is this is political pandering. There is zero question that this was a top priority for a lot of climate-minded voters who were making their voices heard, especially in the last few weeks.
Yeah, well, Senator Elizabeth Warren, the Democrat from Massachusetts, actually was out with some pretty positive words on this decision today. So there's obviously different ends to the spectrum here. Bloomberg's Jen DeLuey, thank you so much for your terrific reporting on this. And it's so important to consider, Joe, that while you're transitioning, there's still going to be a reliance on these legacy fossil fuels. You need energy to create new forms of energy at the end of the day, and it's a bit of a catch-22.
Although you just got a whole new message to deliver on the campaign. With Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. We'll have more straight ahead. This is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons on Bloomberg Radio.
And a good Friday to our television and radio audiences worldwide. Thanks for being with us on the fastest show in politics. Remember when the mantra at the White House, Kaylee Lyons, was, and I think it still is, steady, sustainable growth. That's the goal. Not blow the doors off inflationary growth. Right. And it feels like we're kind of there right now, although as we discussed earlier with Heather Boushey from the North Lawn of the White House, they are not going to take the victory lap. They're not going to celebrate this with so much unknown and so many months before an election.
Well, and we talked to Gene Sperling last night, who, of course, is a senior advisor to the president. You asked him, can you 100% say no recession is coming?
Yeah.
And he basically said, of course I can't say that. No one can say that for 100% certain.
Well,
but you
look
look
at the data.
A recession coming. Well, there always is one eventually. It's just a question of time. But you look at the data. People are still out there spending, and the consumer is the engine of the U.S. economy.
That's absolutely right. PCE this morning making everybody feel pretty good. GDP off the rails yesterday, making everybody feel pretty good about what could have been a slowdown. Bloomberg Economics, I believe, is still predicting one. And Enda Curran from the newsroom here in the Bloomberg Washington Bureau joins us now for a few thoughts on this. I asked Heather Boushey, have we softly landed? What do you think?
Or no landing at all.
Yeah.
I mean, last year was a great year for the economy, no question about it. As one economist said to me, who could have thought the economy would have accelerated under the weight of inflation and interest rates?
How about that?
The problem from the political viewpoint, which you're the expert on, is that's in the rearview mirror now, right? This could be as good as it gets. This year is expected to slow down. The jobs market's already cooling. That's expected to shed some more workers as the year goes on as well. Consumers were going gangbusters in December. Can they really carry that on through the year? Now, the positives are consumer sentiment has improved, actually, because people think interest rates might be coming down. The Fed have signaled they're open to the idea. But next week will be very important before we go next, I think, in the economy story. Next week we get the Fed meeting, and they'll update us what they're thinking. And on Friday we get the jobs data for this month, for January.
Yeah, of course, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge was also in the data today. The PCE core deflator, 2.9% year on year, just 0.2% month on month. Given what you're saying about how we could see some softening showing up, maybe not a hard landing, but a softening for sure, and inflationary pressures clearly going down towards target, what's the argument for the Fed not cutting rates come March?
Well, it's definitely within the realm of as good as, really good soft landing scenario for the Fed, right? I guess for the Fed, the cardinal sin of central banking is you don't want to cut too soon, only for inflation to roar back, right? But there's another camp of people out there saying, listen, take the win. You don't need rates where they're at right now. Start cutting them and give people some pressure. So there's two very divergent camps in all of this. Either way, I think for now, the feeling is, some people like Goldman Sachs are saying they'll cut in March. That probably feels a little bit too soon, I think, judging by most Fed watchers, but the cuts are coming. It's just a question of when they'll come in this cycle.
We saw signs, though, of inflation coming down and having that actually spawn more consumer spending. If they keep hacking away at this, we actually see deflation, God forbid, which, of course, a lot of voters are hoping for. Could we just keep growing?
Well, I mean, look, the economy is expected to slow down this year for sure. But there is, to your point, there's every chance that it escapes a recession. I mean, you can have a slowdown without having a recession.
That's right.
The two aren't mutually exclusive. That's the space it's in right now. But I think it remains to be seen whether or not this inflation is definitely going to come off the boil the way it's been going. Whether it will come back to 2%. People talk about the last mile being the hardest and all of that. It's on track for now, but I think the next few months are really critical for that inflation story.
Yeah, and I guess critical to answering the question of whether or not the Fed actually needed to break something to break the back of inflation, if you will, as we saw decades ago. The idea that you need to see the labor market break or things to actually get difficult so you don't have a consumer that keeps just swiping the card and spending out there and fueling higher prices.
Yeah, so there was a whole big academic debate about this over the last few years. The idea was, with inflation going the way it was, gangbusters, that only meant you have to blow up the jobs market, take pressure out of the system.
Right, yeah.
Here we are now. Thankfully, the jobs market hasn't been blown up and inflation has come down. And some economists are having to have a little bit of a rethink about where they were a few years ago. But the outcome is good. Jobs are holding up, inflation's coming down.
Maybe we need to get Elizabeth Warren and Jay Powell back together to have that conversation all over again. Enda Curran, great to see you. Great conversation and great reporting, as always. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons, as we turn our attention to New York and hand the baton to Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic. I'm sure this is a conversation you're going to carry on here. Carol, what do you have coming up on Bloomberg Business Week?
Yeah, well, we're going to pick up where you guys just left off. I mean, aren't you glad you're not Jay Powell and company? Because it gets a little tricky towards the end. We're glad consumers can still spend, but we're also glad that inflation comes down, but it gets kind of tricky managing them both, right? The Fed doesn't want to slow it down too much. That causes those consumers to even kind of hold back more. But it's a kind of a tricky spot, Tim.
Yeah, it is a tricky spot. And I think back to what you and Kaylee were talking about, Joe, it's like, the American voter doesn't necessarily feel the way that the economy and the numbers are actually showing us. And I think it's a huge, huge challenge for the incumbent right now. It's a huge problem for President Biden. We see it in polling from swing states that say, that Trump is preferred on the economy. And what other figures do voters need to see in order to actually change their minds?
But you got to love when the president, wasn't he like mentioning the consumer sentiment numbers recently and saying how upbeat consumers are? We've got Michael McKee. He's settling into the studio. He's going to actually lay it out for us and give us all the
great
answers.
Political mind, by the way.
he's a great mind, just bottom line.
That's true. We're big fans. We call him the professor down here in Washington. I have long said that for the best political analysis here, it's worth going to the economy unit. Talk to Michael McKee. He'll tell you what's coming next in Washington. Sometimes you need to get out of the bubble, Carol, to know.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's why we like to get out of the bubble of New York occasionally to see what's going on in the rest of the country. But anyway, you guys have a great weekend.
We all live in the big Amtrak bubble. You guys, too. We'll be listening, of course. Tim and Carol are up next. We'll be listening from Michael McKee. Kaylee, I'll meet you a little bit later on Balance of Power.
Yes, sir.
5 p.m. Washington time on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Friday. It's not lost on us either. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar.
I love looking at different things that are going on in our economy. The Fed president's kind of battle it out about what's going to happen next.
And Tim Stenovic.
This story really struck a chord with me. The cost of education. Consumers are out there spending money. They have jobs, and they're continuing to spend money.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Yes, indeed, everybody. They are continuing to spend money. Very good afternoon, everybody. It is Friday, January 26th. Welcome to Bloomberg Business Week live on TV, radio, YouTube, and, of course, Bloomberg Originals. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic. And U.S. economic data, Tim, is front and center again today.
Yeah, as U.S. personal spending topping estimates and the Fed's preferred gauge of underlying inflation slowing to an almost 3-year low. Goldilocks? Or just making it even more confusing as to what the Fed is going to do next week?
That's what we've got Mike McKee coming up. He's going to set us straight on what it all means, what the Fed may do, or how they kind of work it into their calculations when it comes to monetary policy, when maybe they start to cut rates down the road. We do see a move up in yields on this Friday, so we're going to get to all of that in just a moment. Also, one of our most read stories on the Bloomberg has to do with J.P. Morgan. The news came down late yesterday. What does it mean? Could Jamie Dimon be thinking about his exit?
He's been there for a while, since 2005.
I've heard this story before.
Yeah, let's just say that. Heard this story before. Also, another most read, also today's Bloomberg Big Take, which means it's a story that our top editorial brass believe that you will probably want on your radar, all about how Eli Lilly's $600 billion weight loss empire was late but lucky.
Yeah, indeed. This is a great read. Plus, options inside our own Abigail Doolittle with Steve Sosnick, Chief Market Strategist over at Interactive Brokers. Their take on what the options market is showing us. So a lot coming your way on this Friday. First up, though, let's get you set on the market trade. Your top business stories. Here's Charlie Fowler.
Hi, thank you very much, Carol and Tim. We're looking at a mixed market right now, looking at an up week for the S&P 500 index, but right now a 14-point gain. Little changed on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, up less than 0.1%. S&P 500 index down 7 right now. That is a drop of 0.2%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down 60, a decline right now of 0.4%. 10-year yield at 4.16% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.36%. Gold down $3.50 the ounce. Spot gold 2016 the ounce, lower by 0.2%. Crude up 0.7%, 77.77 a barrel, while Bitcoin is advancing now by 5.4% with with a 42,000 handle. Once again, 42,031 on Bitcoin. Intel shares lower after delivering a disappointing forecast, renewing doubts about a long-promised turnaround of the once dominant chip maker. Intel shares today, they are trading lower. We've got Intel down right now by 13%. We have got AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, lower by 1.9%. AMD reports next week, and then next month, NVIDIA, that now lower by 1%. So again, recapping a mixed market on this Friday. S&P down 6, a decline there of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So let's get to the setup at this hour. Charlie, really starting it off for us. We have seen yields across the U.S. curve moving up a little bit as that data showed personal spending topping estimates, even then as the Fed's preferred gauge of underlying inflation slowed to an almost 3-year low. We can't say it enough because this is something we've been focusing on all week.
And look, policymakers are telegraphing that they want to see sustainable signs of cooling before lowering borrowing costs. So the figure's reinforcing bets that a March pivot is still very much elusive at this stage.
Yep, we're
What's
all
your
wondering.
favorite parlor game?
It is my favorite parlor game.
When's the Fed going to cut?
Exactly. All right. He might have some insight on it. Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee is here in studio. We know you've had a long day. I listened to you breaking the numbers earlier today. All the data, Mike, lay it out for us. What kind of picture does it paint of the U.S. economy and what the Fed might be focusing on in that meeting next week?
I hate to be the bearer of good news, but you couldn't.
Darn you!
You really couldn't ask for a much better report than we got today, because it showed inflation continuing to go down, but even at a more rapid pace. It showed people are still getting paid more than inflation, and personal spending was very high. Consumers spent a lot of money in the month of December. And so all of that suggests an economy that's firing all cylinders without generating inflation, which leads us to your question of what does the Fed do next? They've been saying we got to get to 2%, but go back to the last press conference, December 13th, Jay Powell was asked about when do they start cutting, and he said you don't want to wait to 2% to cut rates, because then it would be too late. You'd be reducing restriction on the economy well before you got to 2%, because if you waited, you would overshoot, and then you'd get perhaps a recession. And so the door is cracked open now that we're in the 2s for their preferred inflation measure. When do they want to walk through it? That's going to be the issue.
Yeah, I guess the question is how much more open does the door get between now and March?
Open to March? Open to May?
We get a lot of data between now and March. We get a couple of jobs reports, one next Friday.